Attend, O reader, our tale of wonder. Welcome back to Paper Cuts, everyone. Welcome to another new book. We finished up that issue of Astounding Stories, and so now we return to our little bit of an isekai theme we have going here. With arguably most people's first big experience with having someone whisked away to another world that is far, far different from their own, other than maybe the Alice in Wonderland story. And I guess a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, I guess, is pretty popular. But this one comes in at a very, very close third. It is The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Yes, the one like the movie. Yes, the one Wicked is loosely based on. Yes, the one that's in a very long series that everyone immediately forgot every book after the first one in. And yes, the one that also contains Return of Oz with the terrifying monster people in it in the movie. And yes, the same TikTok I think of every time I post a TikTok on TikTok. So, The Wizard of Oz is very, very well known, and it's been sitting in my list of books to read for a long, long time. I've been sitting there looking at it like, oh man, I gotta get to Wizard of Oz eventually. And eventually is now. Eventually is right now. Let me just update the stream title real quick. We have revealed the book. Reveal it is the book. And so we can begin. Uh, Let me make sure. One more thing. Let me just make sure that nothing exploded. Because I got a notification on my cell phone the second I hit record. Okay, good. It did not explode. Good to know. So, let's dive in just immediately right into the introduction of the book for The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. I almost misread his name. Anyway, introduction. Folklore, legends, myths, and fairy tales have followed childhood through the ages, for every healthy youngster has had a wholesome and instinctive love for stories fantastic, marvelous, and manifestly unreal. The winged fairies of Grimm and Andersen have brought more happiness to childish hearts than all other human creations. Yet the old-time fairy tale, having served for generations, may now be classed as historical in the children's library, for the time has come for a series of newer wonder tales in which the stereotyped genie, dwarf, and fairy are eliminated, together with all the horrible and blood-curdling incidents devised by their authors to point to a fearsome moral for each tale. Modern education includes morality. Therefore, the modern child seeks only entertainment in its wonder tales and gladly dispenses with all disagreeable incident. Having this thought in mind, the story of the Wonderful Wizard of Oz was written solely to please children of today. It aspires to be a modernized fairy tale, in which the wonderment and joy are retained, and the heartaches and nightmares left out. Well, Mr. Baum, I have a great deal of opinions that you have just induced in me very immediately by that introduction, which was written in April of 1900, if you're curious. But I will keep my opinions to myself for now, and we'll talk about them when we have a moment later in the book, which I'm sure we're gonna have opinions. Well, we'll have plenty of opinions time over this whole book. I'm sure of it. Ooh. Everybody, welcome frequent co-host of the stream, Library Cat. Are those emotes? They have not. Oh well. I thought a thing would be in place by tonight, but not so. Not so this time. Let's dive in to the wonderful the Wonderful Wizard of Oz, which apparently I can't say tonight properly, with Chapter 1, The Cyclone. Dorothy lived in the midst of the great Kansas prairies with Uncle Henry, who was a farmer, and Aunt Em, who was the farmer's wife. Well, they're in Kansas, so yeah, they're west of the Mississippi, so it would be Aunt. Sorry, that is a peculiarity of how I speak. Um, if you are east of or immediately abutting the Mississippi, as in, you know, Iowa, for example, Iowa or Illinois, I say aunt. But depending on their location, if they are far enough west, I say aunt instead, and I couldn't tell you why. But that is sure a thing I will say. So expect Aunt M. Just to clarify that out front. Where was I? Dorothy lived in the midst of the great Kansas prairies with Uncle Henry, who was a farmer, and Aunt Em, who was the farmer's wife. Their house was small, for the lumber to build it had to be carried by wagon many miles. There were 4 walls, a floor, and a roof, which made one room, and this room contained a rusty-looking cook-stove, a cupboard for the dishes, a table, 3 or 4 chairs, and the beds. Uncle Henry and Aunt Em had a big bed in one corner, and Dorothy a little bed in another corner. There was no garret at all, and no cellar, except a small hole dug in the ground, called a cyclone cellar, where the family could go in case of one of those great whirlwinds arising, mighty enough to crush any buildings in its path. It was reached by a trap door in the middle of the floor, from which a ladder led down into the small, dark hole. When Dorothy stood in the doorway and looked around, she could see nothing but the great gray prairie on every side. Not a tree nor a house broke the broad sweep of flat country that reached to the edge of the sky in all directions. Yeah, oh, Papa's mouse, we're really in it now. Oh, kitty. For those of you in the podcast library, has laid his little head down upon the armrest and on top of my mouse. Anyway, the sun had baked the plowed land into a gray mass with little cracks running through it. Even the grass wasn't green, for the sun had burned the tops of the long blades until they were the same gray color to be seen everywhere. Once the house had been painted, but the sun blistered the paint and the rains washed it away, and now the house was as dull and as gray as everything else. When Aunt Em came to live there, she was a young, pretty wife, but the sun and the wind had changed her too. They'd taken the sparkle from her eyes and left them a sober gray. They'd taken the red from her cheeks and the lips. They were gray also. She was thin and gaunt and never smiled now. When Dorothy, who was an orphan, first came to her, Aunt Em had been so startled by the child's laughter she would scream and press her hand upon her heart whenever Dorothy's merry voice reached her ears, and she still looked at the little girl with wonder that she could find anything to laugh at. Uncle Henry never laughed. He worked hard from morning till night and did not know what joy was. He was gray also, from his long beard to his rough boots, and he looked stern and solemn and rarely spoke. It was Toto that made Dorothy laugh, and saved her from growing as gray as her other surroundings. Toto wasn't gray. He was a little black dog with long silky hair and small black eyes that twinkled merrily on either side of his funny wee nose. Toto played all day long, and Dorothy played with him and loved him dearly. Today, however, they were not playing. Uncle Henry sat upon the doorstep and looked anxiously at the sky, which was even grayer than usual. Dorothy stood in the door with Toto in her arms and looked at the sky too. Aunt Em was washing the dishes. From the far north they heard a low wail of the wind, and Uncle Henry and Dorothy could see where the long grass bowed in waves before the coming storm. There now came a sharp whistling in the air from the south, and as they turned their eyes that way, they saw ripples in the grass coming from that direction also. Suddenly Uncle Henry stood up. "There's a cyclone coming, Em," he called to his wife. "I'll go look after the stock." There he ran forward to the sheds where the cows and horses were kept. Aunt Em dropped her work and came to the door. One glance told her of the danger close at hand. "Quick, Dorothy, run for the cellar!" she screamed. Toto jumped out of Dorothy's arms and hid under the bed, and the girl started to get him. Aunt Em, badly frightened, threw open the trapdoor on the floor and climbed down the ladder into the small, dark hole. Dorothy caught Toto at last and started to follow her aunt. When she was halfway across the room, there came a great shriek from the wind, and the house shook so hard that she lost her footing and sat down suddenly upon the floor. And a strange thing happened. The house whirled around 2 or 3 times and rose slowly through the air. Dorothy felt as if she were going up in a balloon. The north and south winds met where the house stood and made it the exact center of the cyclone. In the middle of the cyclone, the air is generally still, but the great pressure of the wind on every side of the house raised it up higher and higher until it was the very top of the cyclone. And there it remained and was carried miles and miles away as easily as you could carry a feather. It was very dark, and the wind howled horribly around her, but Dorothy found she was riding quite easily. After the first few whirls around, and one other time when the house tipped badly, she felt as if she were being rocked gently, like a baby in a cradle. Toto didn't like it. He ran about the room, now here, now there, barking loudly, but Dorothy sat quite still on the floor and waited to see what would happen. Once Toto got too near the open trap door and fell in, and at first the little girl thought she had lost him, but soon she saw one of his ears sticking up through the hole, for the strong pressure of the air was keeping him up so he couldn't fall. She crept to the hole, caught Toto by the ear, and dragged him into the room again, afterward closing the trapdoor so no more accidents could happen. Hour after hour passed away, and slowly Dorothy got over her fright, but she felt quite lonely, and the wind shrieked so loudly all about her she nearly became deaf. At first she had wondered if she would be dashed to pieces when the house fell again, but as the hours passed and nothing terrible happened, she stopped worrying and resolved to wait calmly and see what the future would bring. At last she crawled over the swaying floor to her bed and lay down upon it, and Toto followed and lay down beside her. In spite of the swaying of the house and the wailing of the wind, Dorothy soon closed her eyes and fell fast asleep. Chapter 2. The Council with the Munchkins. She was awakened by a shock so sudden and so severe that if Dorothy had not been lying on the soft bed, she might have been hurt. As it was, the jar made her catch her breath and wonder what had happened, and Toto put his little cold nose into her face and whined dismally. Dorothy sat up and noticed that the house was not moving, nor was it dark, for the bright sunshine came in at the window, flooding the little room. She sprang from her bed and with Toto at her heels ran and opened the door. The little girl gave a cry of amazement and looked about her, her eyes growing bigger and bigger at the wonderful sights she saw. The cyclone had set the house down very gently, gently for a cyclone, in the midst of a country of marvelous beauty. There were lovely patches of greensward all about, with stately trees bearing rich and luscious fruits. Banks of gorgeous flowers were on every hand, and birds with rare and brilliant plumage sang and fluttered in the trees and bushes. A little way off was a small brook, rushing and sparkling along between the green banks, and murmuring in a voice very grateful to a little girl who had lived so long on the dry, gray prairies. While she stood looking eagerly at the strange and beautiful sights, she noticed people coming toward her, a group of the queerest people she'd ever seen. They were not as big as the grown folk she'd always been used to, but neither were they very small. In fact, they seemed about as tall as Dorothy, who was a well-grown child for her age, although they were, so far as looks go, many years older. There were men and one a woman, and all were oddly dressed. They wore their round hats that rose to a small point a foot above their heads, with little bells around the brims that tinkled sweetly as they moved. The hats of the men were blue, the little woman's hat was white, and she wore a white gown that hung in pleats from her shoulders. Over it were sprinkled little stars that glistened in the sun like diamonds. The men were dressed in blue of the same shade as their hats, and wore well-polished boots with a deep roll of blue at the top. The men, Dorothy thought, were about as old as Uncle Henry, for two of them had beards, but the woman was doubtless much older. Her face was covered with wrinkles, her hair was nearly white, and she walked rather stiffly. When these people drew near the house, where Dorothy was standing in the doorway, they paused and whispered among themselves, as if afraid to come farther. But the little old woman walked up to Dorothy, made a low bow, and said in a sweet voice, "You are welcome, most noble sorceress, to the land of the Munchkins. We are so grateful to you for having killed the Wicked Witch of the East, and for setting our people free from bondage." Dorothy listened to this speech with wonder. What could the little woman possibly mean by calling her a sorceress and saying she'd killed the Wicked Witch of the East? Dorothy was an innocent, harmless little girl who had been carried by a cyclone many miles from home. She never killed anything in all her life. But the little woman evidently expected her to answer, so Dorothy said with hesitation, You're very kind, but there must be some mistake. I've not killed anything. Well, your house did anyway, replied the little old woman with a laugh. And that's the same thing, see? She continued, pointing to the corner of the house. Don't stick your head in there, kitty. That's not going to end well for you. There's a lot of things in that bag that you probably should not be eating. That's the same thing, see? She continued, pointing to the corner of the house. There are her 2 feet, still sticking out from under a block of wood. Dorothy looked and gave a little cry of fright. There, indeed, just under the corner of the great beam the house rested on, 2 feet were sticking out, shod in silver shoes with pointed toes. That's the first difference from the movie here. Not only is there not that sort of opening scene that kind of implies the dastardly school teacher might actually be the Wicked Witch, but so too, the first difference in actually written details here, these silver shoes with pointed toes. There were definitely some munchkins dressed as described in the book. Not all of them were, but some of them were. But these shoes were silver in the book, apparently, and ruby in the movie. And this may be because I saw the movie first, but I honestly prefer the ruby slippers. I think it's much more magical, you know? Anyway. Oh dear, cried Dorothy, clasping her hands together in dismay. The house must have fallen on her. Whatever shall we do? There's nothing to be done, said the little woman calmly. But who was she? She was the Wicked Witch of the East, as I said. She's held all the Munchkins in bondage for many years, making them slave for her night and day. Now they're all set free, and we're grateful to you for the favor. Who are the Munchkins? They are the people who live in this land of the East where the Wicked Witch ruled. Are you a Munchkin? No, but I'm their friend, although I live in the land of the North. When they saw the Witch of the East was dead, the Munchkins sent a swift messenger to me, and I came at once. I am the Witch of the North. Oh, gracious, are you a real witch? Yes, indeed, but I am a good witch, and the people love me. I'm not as powerful as the Wicked Witch who ruled here, or I should have set the people free myself. But I thought all witches were wicked, said the girl, who was half frightened at facing a real witch. Oh, no, that's a great mistake. There are only 4 witches in all the land of Oz, and 2 of them, those who live in the north and south, are good witches. I know this is true. I'm one of them myself. I cannot be mistaken. Those who dwelt in the east and the west indeed were wicked witches, but now that you've killed one of them, there's but one wicked witch in all the land of Oz, the one who lives in the west. But, said Dorothy, after a moment's thought, Aunt Em has told me all the witches were dead years and years ago. Who is Aunt Em? She's my aunt who lives in Kansas, where I come from. The Witch of the North seemed to think on this for a time, with her head bowed and her eyes upon the ground. Then she looked up and said, I don't know where Kansas is. I've never heard of that country being mentioned before. Tell me, is it civilized country? Oh, yes. And that accounts for it. In the civilized countries, I believe there's no witches left, nor wizards, nor sorceresses, nor magicians. You see, the land of Oz has never been civilized. We were cut off from all the rest of the world, therefore we've got our witches and wizards. Who are the wizards? Oh, Oz himself is the great wizard, answered the witch, sinking her voice to a whisper. He's more powerful than the rest of us altogether. He lives in the City of Emeralds, you see. Dorothy was going to ask another question, but just then the Munchkins, who had been standing quietly by, gave a loud shout and pointed to the corner of the house where the Wicked Witch had been lying. What is it? Asked the little old woman, and looked and began to laugh. The feet of the dead witch had disappeared entirely, and nothing was left but the silver shoes. Oh, she was so old that she dried up quickly in the sun. That's the end of her. The silver shoes are yours. You'll have them to wear. She reached down and picked up the shoes, and after shaking the dust out of them, handed them to Dorothy. The Witch of the East was proud of those silver shoes, said one of the Munchkins. There's some charm connected with them. We never figured it out, though. Dorothy carried the shoes into the house and placed them on the table. Then she came out again to the Munchkins and said, I'm anxious to get back to my aunt and uncle, for I'm sure they're worrying about me. Could you help me find my way? The Munchkins and the witch first looked at one another and then at Dorothy, and shook their heads. At the east, not far from here, there's a great desert. None could live to cross it. It's the same at the south. I've been there and seen it. The south's the country of the quadlings. I'm told that it's the same at the west, and that country where the Winkies live is ruled by the Wicked Witch of the West, who'd make you her slave if you passed her way. The north is my home, and at its edge is the same great desert that surrounds this land of ours. I'm afraid, my dear, you'll have to live with us, said the witch. Dorothy began to sob at this, for she felt lonely among all these strange people. Her tears seemed to grieve the kind-hearted Munchkins, for they immediately took out their handkerchiefs and began to weep also. As for the little old woman, she took off her cap and balanced the point on the end of her nose, while she counted 1, 2, 3 in solemn voice. At once the cap changed to a slate on which was written in big white chalk marks, "Let Dorothy go to the City of Emeralds." The little old woman took the slate from her nose, and having read the words on it, asked, "Is your name Dorothy, my dear?" "Yes," answered the child, looking up and drying her tears. "Then you must go to the City of Emeralds. Perhaps Oz will help you." "Where is this city?" "It's exactly in the center of the country. It's ruled by Oz, the great wizard I told you of." "Is he a good man?" "Oh, he's a good wizard. Whether he's a man or not, I cannot tell. I've never seen him." "How can I get there?" "Oh, you must walk. It's a long journey through a country that's sometimes pleasant and sometimes dark and terrible. However, I will use all the magic arts I know of to keep you from harm." "Won't you go with me?" pleaded the girl, who had begun to look upon the little old woman as her only friend. Uh, "No, I cannot do that, but I will give you my kiss, and no one will dare injure a person who's been kissed by the Witch of the North." She came close to Dorothy and kissed her gently on the forehead. Where her lips touched the girl, they left a round, shining mark, as Dorothy found out soon after. "The road to the City of Emeralds is paved with yellow brick, so you cannot miss it. When you get to Oz, do not be afraid of him, but tell him your story. Ask him to help you. Goodbye, my dear." The three Munchkins bowed low to her and wished her a pleasant journey, after which they walked away through the trees. The witch gave Dorothy a friendly little nod, twirled round on her left heel 3 times, and straightway disappeared, much to the surprise of little Toto, who barked after her loudly enough when she had gone, because he had been afraid to even growl while she stood by. But Dorothy, knowing her to be a witch, had expected her to disappear in just that way, and was not surprised in the least bit. Oh. I must admit, gang, I was a little nervous reading that introduction, like, oh, modern fairy tales don't get to have conflict. I'm like, disagree, but I was also worried it was just gonna be like, oh, this is all gonna be saccharine. There's no conflict, but there's still the main conflict of you need to get to Oz to get out of here. So, we'll see. Honestly, I'm more curious, like, what sort of thing made it into the movie and what didn't. You know, there's a lot of like ancillary. There's a lot of ancillary Oz media now, but I wonder, what sort of deep Ozian lore made it to the books, and what is just other people going, it'd be a good idea. For example, the whole plot of Wicked. Is that drawn from these books? We'll see. If I really like this, I might wind up picking up later books in the series. And I know I've been saying that a lot lately with the Barsoom series. I was like, oh yeah, we gotta come back to this, and we will be coming back to Barsoom eventually. But we'll see how I like this one. I like the idea of having some series books to bounce off of when we're feeling up to it. And hopefully Oz winds up being a series that also works. Anyway, let's dive into Chapter 3, How Dorothy Saved the Scarecrow. When Dorothy was left alone, she began to feel hungry, so she went to the cupboard and cut herself some bread, which she spread with butter. She gave some to Toto, and taking a pail from the shelf, she carried it down to the little brook and filled it with clear, sparkling water. Toto ran over to the trees and began to bark at the birds sitting there. Dorothy went to get him and saw such delicious fruit hanging from the branches that she gathered some of it, finding it just what she wanted to help out her breakfast. Then she went back to the house, and having helped herself and Toto to get a good drink of the cool, clear water, she set about making ready for the journey to the City of Emeralds. Dorothy had only one other dress, but that happened to be clean and was hanging on a peg beside her bed. It was gingham with checks of white and blue, and although the blue was somewhat faded with many washings, it was still a pretty frock. The girl washed herself carefully, dressed herself in the clean gingham, and tied her pink sunbonnet on her head. She took a little basket and filled it with bread from the cupboard, laying a white cloth over the top. Then she looked down at her feet and noticed how old and worn her shoes were. "They'll surely never do for a long journey, Toto." And Toto looked up into her face with his little black eyes and wagged his tail to show he knew what she meant. At that moment, Dorothy saw lying on the table the silver shoes that had belonged to the Witch of the East. "I wonder if they'll fit me. They'd be just the thing to take a long walk in. They can't wear out." She took off her old leather shoes and tried on the silver ones, which fitted her as well as if they'd been made for her. And finally she picked up her basket. "Come along, Toto. We'll go to the Emerald City and ask the Great Oz how to get back to Kansas again." She closed the door, locked it, and put the key carefully in the pocket of her dress. And so, with Toto trotting along soberly behind her, she started on her journey. There were several roads nearby, but it didn't take her long to find the one paved with yellow bricks. Within a short time she was walking briskly toward the Emerald City, her silver shoes tinkling merrily on the hard yellow roadbed. The sun shone bright, and the birds sang sweetly, and Dorothy did not feel nearly so bad as you might think a little girl who had been suddenly whisked away from her own country and set down in the midst of a strange land would be. She was surprised, as she walked along, to see how pretty the country was about her. There were neat fences at the sides of the road, painted a dainty blue color, and beyond them were fields of grain and vegetables in abundance. Evidently, the Munchkins were good farmers and able to raise large crops. Once in a while she'd pass a house, and the people came out to look at her and bow low as she went by, for everyone knew she had been the means of destroying the Wicked Witch and setting them free from their bondage. The houses of the Munchkins were odd-looking dwellings. Each was round, with a big dome for a roof, and all were painted blue, for in this country the East blue was the favored color. Toward evening, when Dorothy was tired with her long walk and began to wonder whether she should pass the night, she came to a house rather larger than the rest. On the green lawn before it, many men and women were dancing. 5 little fiddlers played as loudly as possible, and the people were laughing and singing, while the big table nearby was loaded with delicious fruits, nuts, pies, and cakes, and many other good things to eat. The people greeted Dorothy kindly, and invited her to supper and to pass the night with them, for this was the home of one of the richest Munchkins in the land, and his friends were gathered with him to celebrate their freedom from the bondage of the Wicked Witch. Dorothy ate a hearty supper, and was waited upon by the rich Munchkin himself, whose name was Bok. Then she sat upon a settee and watched the people dance. Oh, sorry about that. I gotta sneeze sometime, and apparently it was right now. Anyway, when Bok saw her silver shoes, he said, "Oh, you must be a great sorceress." "Oh, why's that?" "Because you wear silver shoes. You've killed the Wicked Witch. Besides, you've got white in your frock, and only witches and sorceresses wear white." My dress is blue and white checked," said Dorothy, smoothing out the wrinkles in it. "It's kind of you to wear that. Blue's the color of the Munchkins, and white is the witch color, so we know you're a friendly witch." Dorothy didn't know what to say to this, for all the people seemed to think her a witch, and she knew very well she was only an ordinary little girl who had come by the chance of a cyclone into a strange land. When she tired watching the dancing, Bock led her into the house, where he gave her a room with a pretty bed in it. The sheets were made of blue cloth, and Dorothy slept soundly in them till morning, with Toto curled up on the blue rug beside her. She ate a hearty breakfast, and watched a wee munchkin baby who played with Toto and pulled his tail and crowed and laughed in a fine way that greatly amused Dorothy. Toto was a fine curiosity for all the people, since they'd never seen a dog before. "How far is it to the Emerald City?" "I don't know, for I've never been there. It's better for people to keep away from Oz unless they've got business with him, but it's a long way to the Emerald City. It'll take you many days. The country here is rich and pleasant, but you gotta pass through the tough and rough and dangerous places before you reach the end of your journey." This worried Dorothy a little, but she knew that only the Great Oz could help her get back to Kansas again, so she resolved not to turn back. She bade her friends goodbye and again started along the road of yellow brick. When she'd gone several miles, she thought she would stop to rest, and so climbed to the top of a fence beside the road and sat down. There was a great cornfield beyond the fence, and not far away she saw a scarecrow, placed high on a pole to keep the birds from the ripe corn. Dorothy leaned her chin upon her hand and gazed thoughtfully at the scarecrow. Its head was a small sack stuffed with straw, with eyes, nose, and mouth painted on it to represent a face. An old pointed blue hat that had belonged to some munchkin was perched on his head, and the rest of the figure was a blue suit of clothes, worn and faded, that had also been stuffed with straw. On the feet wore some old boots with blue tops, such as every man wore in this country, and the figure was raised up above the stalks of corn by means of the pole stuck of its back. While Dorothy was looking earnestly into the queer painted face of the scarecrow, she was surprised to see one of the eyes slowly wink at her. She thought she must have been mistaken at first, for none of the scarecrows in Kansas ever winked, but presently the figure nodded its head to her in a friendly way. Then she climbed down from the fence and walked up to it, while Toto ran around the pole and barked. "Good day," said the scarecrow in a rather husky voice. "Did you speak?" "Certainly. How do you do?" "I'm pretty well, thank you. How do you do?" "I'm not feeling well," said the scarecrow with a smile. "It's very tedious being perched up here day and night to scare away crows." "Can't you get down?" "No, for the pole is stuck up my back. If you'll please take away the pole, I will be greatly obliged to you." Dorothy reached up both arms and lifted the figure off the pole, for being stuffed with straw, it was quite light. "Thank you very much," said the scarecrow when he'd been set down on the ground. "Feel like a new man." Dorothy was puzzled at this, for it sounded queer to hear a stuffed man speak, and to see him bow and walk alongside her. "Who are you?" asked the scarecrow when he'd stretched himself and yawned. "Where are you going?" "My name's Dorothy, and I'm going to Emerald City to ask the Great Oz to send me back to Kansas." "Where's the Emerald City? Who's Oz?" "Why, don't you know?" "No, indeed, I don't know anything. You see, I'm stuffed. I've got no brains at all." "Oh, I'm awfully sorry for you." "You think if I go to the Emerald City with you that Oz would give me some brains?" "I cannot tell, but you may come with me if you like." "If Oz wouldn't give you any brains, you'll be no worse off than you are now." "That's true. You see," he continued confidentially, "I don't mind my legs and arms and body being stuffed. I can't get hurt. Anybody treads on my toes or sticks a pin into me doesn't matter. I can't feel it. But I do not want people to call me a fool, and if my head stays stuffed with straw instead of brains, as yours is, well, how am I ever to know anything?" "I understand how you feel. If you come with me, I'll ask Oz to do all he can for you." "Thank you." They walked back to the road, and Dorothy helped him over the fence, so they started along the path of the yellow brick for the Emerald City. Toto didn't like this addition to the party at first. He smelled around the stuffed man as if he suspected there might be a nest of rats in the straw, and he often growled in an unfriendly way at the scarecrow. "Oh, don't mind Toto, he never bites." "Oh, I'm not afraid. Can't hurt the straw. Let me carry that basket for you. I shouldn't mind it. I can't get tired." I'll tell you a secret. There's only one thing in the world I'm afraid of. Well, what is that? The Munchkin farmer who made you? Oh, no, no. It's a lighted match. Of course he fears a lighted match. Man's made of straw. I would too if I was in his position. Chapter 4. The Road Through the Forest. After a few hours, the road began to be rough, and the walking grew so difficult that the Scarecrow often stumbled over the yellow bricks, which were very uneven here. Sometimes, indeed, they were broken or missing altogether, leaving holes that Toto jumped across and Dorothy walked around. As for the Scarecrow, having no brains, he walked straight ahead, and so stepped into the holes and fell at full length on the hard bricks. It never hurt him, however, and Dorothy would pick him up and set him upon his feet again, while he joined her in laughing merrily at his own mishap. The farms were not nearly so well cared for here as they were farther back. There were fewer houses and fewer fruit trees, and the farther they went, the more dismal and lonesome the country became. At noon they sat down by the roadside near a little brook, and Dorothy opened her basket and got out some bread. She offered a piece to the Scarecrow, but he refused. "I'm never hungry, and it's a lucky thing I'm not, for my mouth is only painted. If I should cut a hole in it so I could eat, the straw I'm stuffed with would come out. And, well, wouldn't that just spoil the shape of my head?" Dorothy saw at once that this was true, so she only nodded and went on eating her bread. Ugh. "Tell me something about yourself and the country you came from," said the Scarecrow when she had finished her dinner. So she told him all about Kansas and how gray everything was there and how the cyclone had carried her to this queer land of Oz. The Scarecrow listened carefully and said, "I cannot understand why you should wish to leave this beautiful country and go back to the gray, dry place you call Kansas." "And that's 'cause you have no brains. No matter how dreary and gray our homes are, we people of flesh and blood would rather live there than in any other country, be it ever so beautiful. There's no place like home." The Scarecrow sighed. "Of course I can't understand it. If your heads were stuffed with straw like mine, you'd probably all live in the beautiful places, and then Kansas would have no people at all. It's fortunate for Kansas you've got brains." "Well, won't you tell me a story while we're resting?" The Scarecrow looked at her reproachfully and answered, "My life has been so short, I really know nothing whatsoever. It was only made day before yesterday. What happened in the world before all that time is unknown to me. Luckily, when the farmer made my head, one of the first things he did was to paint my ears so I could hear what was going on. There's another Munchkin with him, and the first thing I heard was the farmer saying, 'How do you like those ears?' 'And they aren't straight,' answered the other. 'Well, never mind,' said the farmer, 'their ears just the same,' which was true enough. 'Now I'll make the eyes,' said the farmer, and so he painted my right eye, and as soon as it was finished I found myself looking at him, everything around me, with a great deal of curiosity. For that matter, this was my first glimpse of the world.' 'That's a rather pretty eye,' remarked the Munchkin who was watching the farmer. 'The blue paint is just the color of her eyes.' 'I think I'll make the other one a little bigger,' said the farmer, and so when the second eye was done I could see much better than before. Then he made my nose and my mouth, but I didn't speak. At that time I didn't know what a mouth was for. I had the fun of watching them make my body and my arms and my legs. When they fastened on my head at last I felt very proud, for I thought I was just as good a man as anyone." "This fellow'll scare the crows fast enough," said the farmer. "He looks just like a man." "Why, he is a man," said the other, and I quite agreed with him. The farmer carried me up under his arm to the cornfield and set me up on a tall stick, where you found me. He and his friends soon after walked away and left me alone. I didn't like to be deserted this way, so I tried to walk after them, but my feet wouldn't touch the ground. I was forced to stay on that pole. It was such a lonely life to lead. I had nothing to think of, having been made such a little while before. Many crows and other birds flew into the cornfield, but as soon as they saw me they flew away again, thinking I was a Munchkin. This pleased me, made me feel that I was quite an important person. By and by, an old crow flew near me, and after looking at me carefully, he perched upon my shoulder and said, "I wonder if that farmer thought to fool me in this clumsy manner. Any crow of sense see you are only stuffed with straw." Then he hopped down at my feet and ate all the corn he wanted. The other birds, seeing he wasn't harmed by me, came to eat the corn too, so in a short time there was a great flock of them about me. I felt sad at this, for it showed I wasn't such a good scarecrow after all, but the old crow comforted me. "If only you had brains in your head, then you'd be as good of a man as any of them, and a better man than some of them. Brains are the only thing worth having in this world, no matter whether one is a crow or a man." And after these crows had gone, I thought this over, decided I'd try hard to get some brains. By good luck, you came along and pulled me off the stake. From what you say, I'm sure the great Oz will give me brains just as soon as we get to the Emerald City. "I hope so, since you seem anxious to have them." "Oh, yes, I'm anxious. It's an uncomfortable feeling to know one is a fool." "Well, let us go then." And she handed the basket to Scarecrow. There were no fences at all by the roadside now, and the land was rough and untilled. Toward evening they came to a great forest, where the branches grew so big and close together that their branches met over the road of the yellow brick. It was almost dark under the trees, for branches shut out the daylight, but the travelers did not stop, and went on into the forest. "Well, if this road goes in, it must come out," said the Scarecrow, "and the Emerald City is at the other end of the road. We must go wherever it leads us." "Anyone would know that." "Well, certainly, that's why I know it. If I required brains to figure it out, I should never have said it." After an hour or so, the light faded away, and they found themselves stumbling along in the darkness. Dorothy couldn't see at all, but Toto could, for some dogs see very well in the dark, and the Scarecrow declared that he could see as well as by the Scarecrow and the Scarecrow declared he could see as well as by day. So she took hold of his arm and managed to get along fairly well. "If you see any house or any place where we can pass the night, you must tell me. It's very uncomfortable walking in the dark." Soon after, the Scarecrow stopped. "I see a little cottage at the right of us, built of logs and branches. Shall we go there?" "Yes, indeed. I'm all tired out." So the Scarecrow led her through the trees until they reached the cottage, and Dorothy entered and found a bed of dried leaves in one corner. She lay down at once, and with Toto beside her, soon fell into a sound sleep. The Scarecrow, who was never tired, stood up in another corner and waited patiently until morning came. Oh, oh. Let me get a little stretch in before we start chapter 5. I feel like I'm full of yawns tonight. Ah. Hmm. Okay. I think I got all my yawns out. We'll see. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. A friendly reminder, I do have channel point redeems in regards to some caffeine. If you feel like I'm dozing off too much, you could fix it. You the viewer. It's entirely feasible. Through the power of I have affiliate now and so people can do channel point things. While we're between chapters here, I just want to point out that the podcast actually dropped new episodes today. We are starting a new book in the podcast as well. The podcast is back on. Oh, excuse me. Inside's got a little mad with me there. Just had to reset the old lungs there. Where was I? Podcast episodes today. Podcast is on the First Men in the Moon, which is very exciting. That was a really enjoyable old H.G. Wells tale, and I really love when the podcast aligns starting a new book with when the live show does. I feel like it's very pleasant. So there's plenty for you to listen to if you want to save Wizard of Oz for later. There is a whole 2 episodes on the First Men of the Moon if you prefer that. But personally, right now, I've already read the First Men of the Moon, and so I'd prefer to keep going on Wizard of Oz. So let's do that with Chapter 5, The Rescue of the Tin Woodman. When Dorothy awoke, the sun was shining through the trees, and Toto had been out long chasing birds and squirrels besides. She sat up and looked around her. There was the Scarecrow still standing patiently in his corner, waiting for her. "Oh, we must go and search for water." "Oh, why do you want water?" "To wash my face clean after the dust of the road, and to drink so the dry bread will not stick in my throat." "Well, it must be inconvenient to be made of flesh, for you must sleep and eat and drink. However, you've got brains, and it's worth a lot of bother to be able to think properly." They left the cottage and walked through the trees until they found a little spring of clear water where Dorothy drank and bathed and ate her breakfast. She saw there wasn't much bread left in the basket, and the girl was thankful the Scarecrow did not have to eat anything, for there was scarcely enough for herself and Toto for the day. When she'd finished her meal and was about to go back to the road of yellow brick, she was startled to hear a deep groan nearby. "What was that?" "I cannot imagine, but we can go and see." Just then another groan reached their ears, and the sound seemed to come from behind them. They turned and walked through the forest a few steps. Then Dorothy discovered something shining in a ray of sunshine that fell between the trees. She ran to the place and stopped short with a little cry of surprise. One of the big trees had been partly chopped through, and standing beside it, with an uplifted axe in his hands, was a man made entirely of tin. His head and his arms and his legs were jointed upon his body, but he stood perfectly motionless, as if he couldn't stir at all. Dorothy looked at him in amazement, and so did the Scarecrow, while Toto barked sharply and made a snap at his tin legs, which hurt Toto's teeth. "Did you groan?" "Yes, I did. I've been groaning for more than a year, and no one's ever heard me before or come to help me." "What can I do for you?" She was moved by the sad voice in which the man spoke. "Get the oil can and oil my joints. They're rusted so badly I cannot move them at all. If I'm well oiled, I shall be soon all right again. You will find an oil can on the shelf in my cottage." And Dorothy at once ran back to the cottage and found the oil can. Then she returned and asked anxiously, "Where are your joints?" "Oil my neck first," replied the Tin Woodman. So she oiled it, and as it was quite badly rusted, the Scarecrow took hold of the tin head and moved it gently from side to side until it worked freely, and the man could turn it himself. "Now oil the joints in my arms." And Dorothy carefully oiled them, and the Scarecrow bent them just as carefully, till they were quite free from rust and as good as new as well. The Tin Woodman gave a sigh of satisfaction and lowered his axe, which he leaned against the tree. "This is a great comfort. I've been holding that axe in the air ever since I rusted, and I'm glad to be able to put it down at last. Now, if you oil the joints of my legs, I shall be all right once more." And so they oiled his legs until he could move them freely, and he thanked them again and again for his release, for he seemed a very polite creature and very grateful. "I might have stood there always if you hadn't come along, so you've certainly saved my life. Oh, how do you happen to be here?" "We're on our way to the Emerald City to see the Great Oz. We stopped at your cottage to pass the night." "Well, why do you wish to see Oz?" I want him to send me back to Kansas, and the Scarecrow wants him to put a few brains into his head." The Tin Woodsman appeared to think deeply for a moment, and then he said, "Oh, do you suppose Oz could give me a heart?" I guess so. It'd be just as easy to give the Scarecrow brains, anyway." "That's true. So, if you'll allow me to join your party, I'll also go to the Emerald City and ask Oz to help me." "Oh, come along, then," said the Scarecrow heartily, and Dorothy added that she'd be pleased to have his company. So the Tin Woodsman shouldered his axe, and they all passed through the forest until they came to the road that was paved with yellow brick. The Tin Woodsman asked Dorothy to put the oil can in her basket, "for if I should get caught in the rain and rust again, I'd need the oil can pretty badly." It was a bit of good luck to have their new comrade join the party, for soon after they'd begun their journey again, they came to a place where the trees and branches grew so thick over the road that the travelers couldn't pass. But the Tin Woodsman set to work with his axe and chopped so well that he soon cleared a passage for the entire party. Dorothy was thinking so earnestly as they walked along that she didn't notice when the Scarecrow stumbled into a hole and rolled over to the side of the road. Indeed, he was obliged to call her to help him up again. "Oh, why didn't you walk around the hole?" "I don't know enough," replied the Scarecrow cheerfully. "My head is stuffed with straw, you know, and that's why I'm going to Oz to ask him for some brains." "Well, I see, but after all, brains aren't the best thing in the world." "Have you got any?" "No, but my head's quite empty. But I had brains once, and a heart also, and having tried 'em both, I should much rather have a heart." "Why is that?" "I'll tell you my story, and then you'll know." So, while they were walking through the forest, the Tin Woodsman told them the following story. "I was born the son of a woodsman who chopped down trees in the forest and sold the wood for a living. When I grew up, I too became a wood chopper, and after my father died, I took care of my old mother as long as she lived. And I made up my mind that instead of living alone, I'd marry so I wouldn't become lonely. There was one of them Munchkin girls who was so beautiful I soon grew to love her with all my heart. She, on her part, promised to marry me as soon as I had enough money to build a better house for her, so I set to work harder than ever. But the girl lived with an old woman who didn't want her to marry anyone. She was so lazy she wished the girl to remain with her to do the cooking and the housework. So the old woman went to the Wicked Witch of the East and promised her 2 sheep and a cow if she'd prevent the marriage. So thereupon the Wicked Witch enchanted my axe, and when I was chopping away at my best one day, I was anxious to get to the new house after all, get my new wife and my new life as soon as possible. The axe slipped all at once and cut off my left leg. This at first seemed a great misfortune. I knew a one-legged man who wouldn't do very well as a wood chopper, so I went to a tinsmith, had him make me a new leg out of tin. The leg worked pretty well once I was used to it, but my action angered the Wicked Witch of the East. She'd promised the old woman I shouldn't marry the pretty Munchkin girl. When I started chopping again, my axe slipped and cut off my right leg. So again I went to the tinsmith, and again he made me a leg out of tin. After this, the enchanted axe cut off my arms one after the other, but nothing daunted, I had them replaced with tin ones. The Wicked Witch then made the axe slip and cut off my head. First I thought that was the end of things, but the tinsmith happened to come along, made me a new head out of tin. Thought I'd beaten the Wicked Witch then, and I worked harder than ever. But little did I know how cruel my enemy could be. She thought of a new way to kill my love for the beautiful Munchkin maiden, made my axe slip again, so it cut right through my body, splitting me into two halves. Once more the tinsmith came to my help, made me body a tin, fastening my tin arms and legs and head to it by means of joints so I could move around as well as ever, but alas, I now had no heart, so I lost all my love for that Munchkin girl. Didn't care whether I married her or not. Suppose she's still living with that old woman, waiting for me to come after her. My body shone so brightly in the sun I felt very proud of it. Didn't matter now if my axe slipped, it couldn't cut me. There was only one danger, that my joints would rust, but I kept an oil can in my cottage, took care to oil myself whenever I needed it. However, there came a day when I forgot to do this, and being caught in a rainstorm, before I thought of the danger, my joints had rusted. I left to stand in them woods till you came out to help me. It was a terrible thing to undergo, but during the year I stood there, I had time to think that the greatest loss I had known was the loss of my heart. While I was in love, I was the happiest man on earth, but no one can love who doesn't have a heart, and so I'm resolved to ask Oz to give me one. If he does, I'll go back to the Munchkin Maiden and marry her. Both Dorothy and the Scarecrow had been greatly interested in the story of the Tin Woodman, and now they knew why he was so anxious to get a new heart. All the same, I shall ask for brains instead of a heart, for a fool would not know what to do with a heart if he had one. Well, I'll take the heart. Brains don't make you happy, and happiness is the best thing in the world. Dorothy didn't say anything. She was puzzled to know which one of her friends was right, and she decided if she could get back to Kansas and Aunt Em, it didn't matter whether so much if the woodman had no brain or the scarecrow no heart, or each got what he wanted. What worried her most was that the bread was nearly gone, and another meal for herself and Toto would empty the basket. To be sure, neither the woodman nor the scarecrow ever ate anything, but she wasn't made of tin or straw, and could not live unless she was fed. Let's move on to Chapter 6, The Cowardly Lion. All this time, Dorothy and her companions had been walking through the thick woods. The road was still paved with yellow brick, but these were much covered by dried branches and dried leaves from the trees, and the walking was not all that good. There were few birds in this part of the forest, for birds love the open country where there's plenty of sunshine. But now and then there came a deep growl from some wild animal hidden among the trees. These sounds made the little girl's heart beat fast, for she didn't know what made them, but Toto knew, and he walked close to Dorothy's side, didn't even bark in return. How long will it be for... wait, no, that's Dorothy. How long will it be, the child asked of the Tin Woodsman, before we're out of the forest? Well, I can't tell. I've never been to the Emerald City. My father went there once when I was a boy. He said it was a long journey through dangerous country, although nearer to the city where Oz dwells, the country gets beautiful again. But I'm not afraid, as long as I got my old can. Nothing can hurt the Scarecrow, and you've got upon your forehead the mark of the Good Witch's kiss, and that'll protect you from harm. But Toto, what'll protect him? Well, we'd protect him ourselves if he's in danger. Just as he spoke, there came from a forest a terrible roar, and the next moment a great lion bounded into the road. With one blow of his paw, he sent the Scarecrow spinning over and over to the edge of the road. Then he struck at the Tin Woodsman with his sharp claws. But to the lion's surprise, he could make no impression on the tin, although the woodman did fall over in the road and lie still. Little Toto, now that he had an enemy to face, ran barking toward the lion, and the great beast had opened his mouth to bite the dog when Dorothy, fearing Toto would be killed, and heedless of the danger, rushed forward and slapped the lion upon his nose as hard as she could, while she cried out, "Don't you dare to bite Toto! You ought to be ashamed of yourself, a big beast like you to bite a poor little dog!" "I didn't bite him," said the lion as he rubbed his nose with his paw where Dorothy had hit it. "No, but you tried to. You're nothing but a big coward." "I know it," said the lion, hanging his head in shame. "I've always known it, but how can I help it?" "I don't know, I'm sure. Think of your striking a stuffed man like the poor Scarecrow." "Was he stuffed?" asked the lion in surprise as he watched her pick up the Scarecrow and set him upon his feet, while she patted him into shape again. "Of course he's stuffed," replied Dorothy, who was still angry. "Well, that's why he went over so easily," remarked the lion. "It astonished me to see him whirl around so. Is the other one stuffed also?" "No, he's made of tin," and she helped the woodman up again. "That's why you nearly blunted my claws, when they scratched against the tin and made a cold shiver run down my back. What's that little animal you're so tender of?" "He's my dog, Toto." "Is he made of tin or stuffed?" Neither. He's I a meat dog." "Oh, he's a curious animal. Seems remarkably small now that I look at him. No one could think of biting such a little thing except a coward like me." "What makes you a coward?" Dorothy asked, looking at the great beast in wonder, for he was as big as a small horse. "It's a mystery. I suppose I was born that way. All the other animals in the forest naturally expect me to be brave. Lions everywhere thought to be the king of beasts, after all. I learned that if I roared very loudly, every living thing was frightened and got out of my way. Whenever I met a man, he's been awfully scared, but I just roared at him, and he's always run away as fast as he could go. If the elephants and tigers and bears had ever tried to fight me, I should run myself. I'm such a coward, but just as soon as they hear me roar, they're all trying to get away from me. Of course I let them go." "But that isn't right. The king of beasts shouldn't be a coward." "I know it," returned the lion, wiping a tear from his eye with the tip of his tail. "It's my great sorrow. It makes my life very unhappy. Whenever there's danger, my heart begins to beat fast." "Well, perhaps you got a heart disease." "Maybe." If you have, well, you ought to be glad. Proves you got a heart at least. For my part, I got no heart, and I ain't got no way to have heart disease." "Perhaps if I had no heart, I should not be a coward." "Have you got brains?" "I suppose so. I've never looked to see." I'm going to the Great Oz to ask him to give me some, for my head is stuffed with straw." "And I'm going to ask him to give me a heart." "And I'm going to ask him to send Toto and me back to Kansas." "Do you think Oz could give me courage?" "No, just as easily as he could give me brains, or give me a heart, or send me back to Kansas." "Then if you don't mind, I'll go with you, for my life is simply unbearable without a bit of courage." "You'll be very welcome. You'll keep away the other wild beasts. Seems to me they must be more cowardly than you are if they allow you to scare them so easily." "Well, they really are, but that doesn't make me any braver. Long as I know myself to be a coward, I shall be unhappy." And so once more the little company set off upon the journey, the lion walking with stately strides at Dorothy's side. Toto didn't approve of this new comrade at first, for he could not forget how nearly he had been crushed between the lion's great jaws. But after a time he became more at ease, and presently Toto and the cowardly lion had grown to be good friends. During the rest of that day there was no other adventure to mar the peace of their journey. Once, indeed, the Tin Woodman stepped upon a beetle that was crawling along the road, and killed the poor little thing. This made the Tin Woodman very unhappy, for he was always careful not to hurt any living creature, and as he walked along he wept several tears of sorrow and regret. These tears ran slowly down his face and over the hinges of his jaw, and there they rusted. When Dorothy presently asked him a question, the Tin Woodman could not open his mouth, for his jaws were tightly rusted together. He became greatly frightened at this, and made many motions to Dorothy to relieve him, but she couldn't understand. The lion was also puzzled to know what was wrong, but the Scarecrow seized the oil can from Dorothy's basket and oiled the woodsman's jaws, so that after a few moments he could talk as well as before. "This'll serve me a lesson to look where I step. If I kill another bug or beetle, I should surely cry again, and cry and rust my jaws so that I can't speak." Thereafter he walked very carefully, with his eyes on the road, and we saw a tiny ant toiling. And when he saw a tiny ant toiling by, he'd step over it so as to not harm it. The Tin Woodman knew very well he had no heart, and therefore he took great care to never be cruel or unkind to anything. "You people with hearts, you've got something to guide you, and you need never do wrong, but I have no heart, and so I must be careful. When Oz gives me a heart, of course, I needn't mind so much." The Journey to the Great Oz, Chapter 7. They were obliged to camp out that night under a large tree in the forest, for there were no houses near. The tree made a good, thick covering to protect them from the dew, and the Tin Woodsman chopped a great pile of wood with his axe, and Dorothy built a splendid fire that warmed her and made her feel less lonely. She and Toto ate the last of their bread, and now she did not know what they would do for breakfast. "If you wish, I could go into the forest and kill a deer for you. You can roast it by the fire, since your tastes are so peculiar you prefer cooked food, and then you'll have a very good breakfast." "No, don't. Please don't. I should certainly weep if you kill a poor deer, then my jaws would rust again." But the lion went away into the forest and found his own supper, and no one knew what it was, for he didn't mention it. And the Scarecrow found a tree full of nuts, and filled Dorothy's basket with them, so that she would not be hungry for quite a long time. She thought this was very kind and thoughtful of the Scarecrow, but she laughed heartily at the awkward way in which the poor creature picked up the nuts. His padded hands were so clumsy, and the nuts were so small, that he dropped almost as many as he put in the basket. But the Scarecrow didn't mind how long it took him to fill the basket, for it enabled him to keep away from the fire, as he feared a spark might get into his straw and burn him up. So he kept a good distance away from the flames, and only came near to cover Dorothy with dry leaves when she lay down to sleep. These kept her very snug and warm. She slept soundly until morning. When it was daylight, the girl bathed her face in a little rippling brook, and soon after they all started toward the Emerald City. This was to be an eventful day for the travelers. They'd hardly been walking an hour when before them a great ditch crossed the road and divided the forest as far as they could see on either side. It was a very wide ditch, and when they crept up to the edge and looked into it, they could also see it was very deep. There were big, jagged rocks on the very bottom. The sides were so steep that none of them could climb down, and for a moment it seemed like their journey must end. "What shall we do?" "I haven't the faintest idea," and the lion shook his shaggy mane and looked thoughtful. But the Scarecrow said, "We cannot fly, that is certain. Neither can we climb down into this great ditch. Therefore, if we cannot jump over it, we must stop where we are." "I think I could jump over it," said the Cowardly Lion, after measuring the distance carefully in his mind. "Then we are all right, for you can carry us all over on your back one at a time." "Well, I'll try it. Who will go first?" "I will, for if you found you couldn't jump over the gulf, Dorothy would be killed or the Tin Woodman badly dented on the rocks below. But if I am on your back, it will not matter so much, for the fall would not hurt me at all." "I'm terribly afraid of falling myself, but suppose there's nothing to do but try it. Get on my back, we'll make the attempt." The Scarecrow sat upon the lion's back, and the big beast walked to the edge of the gulf and crouched down. "Why don't you run and jump?" "Because that isn't the way we lions do these things." And then, giving a great spring, he shot through the air and landed safely on the other side. They were all greatly pleased to see how easily he did it, and after the Scarecrow had gotten down from his back, the lion sprang across the ditch again. Dorothy thought she would go next, so she took Toto in her arms and climbed on the lion's back, holding on tightly to his mane with one hand. The next moment it seemed as if she were flying through the air. Then before she had time to think about it, she was safe on the other side. The lion went back a third time and got the Tin Woodman. Then they all sat down for a few moments to give the beast a chance to rest, for his great leaps had made his breath short, and he panted like a big dog that was running too long. They found the forest very thick on this side, and it looked dark and gloomy. After the lion had rested, they started along the road of yellow brick, silently wondering, each in his own mind, if they would ever come to the end of the woods and reach the bright sunshine again. To add to their discomfort, they soon heard strange noises in the depths of the forest, and the lion whispered to them that it was in this part of the country that Kalidas lived. "What's a Kalida?" "They're monstrous beasts with bodies like bears and heads like tigers and claws so long and sharp they could tear me in two as easily as I could kill Toto. Terribly afraid of the Kalidas." "I'm not surprised that you are. They must be dreadful beasts." The lion was about to reply when suddenly they came to another gulf across the road. This one was so broad and so deep that the lion knew at once that he should not leap across it. So they sat down to consider what they should do, and after serious thought, the Scarecrow said, "Here's a great here is a great tree standing close to the ditch. If the Tin Woodsman can chop it down, it will easily fall to the other side so he can walk across it easily.
That's a first-rate idea. One would almost suspect you had brains in your head instead of straw.
The woodsman set to work at once, and so sharp was his axe that the tree was soon... Excuse me. And so sharp was his axe that the tree was soon chopped nearly through. Then the lion put his strong front legs against the tree and pushed with all his might, and slowly but surely the big tree tipped and fell with a crash across the ditch, with its top branches on either side. They had just started to cross this queer bridge when a sharp growl made them all look up, and to their horror they saw running toward them two great beasts with bodies like bears and heads like tigers.
"They're the Kalidas,"
said the cowardly lion, beginning to tremble. "Quick, let us cross over," cried the Scarecrow. So Dorothy went first, holding Toto in her arms. The Tin Woodsman followed, and the Scarecrow came next. The lion, although he was certainly afraid, turned to face the Kalidas, and then he gave so loud and terrible a roar that Dorothy screamed, and the Scarecrow fell over backwards, even while the fierce beast stopped short and looked at him in surprise. But seeing that they were bigger than the lion, and remembering there were two of them and only one of him, the Kalidas again rushed forward, and the lion crossed over the tree and turned to see what they would do next. Without stopping an instant, the fierce beasts also began to cross the tree, and the lion said to Dorothy,
"We're lost. They'll surely tear us to pieces with their sharp claws. Stand close behind me. I'll fight them as long as I'm alive."
"Wait a minute," called the Scarecrow. He'd been thinking of what was best to be done. Now he asked the Woodman to chop away the end of the tree that rested on their side of the ditch. The Tin Woodman began to use his axe at once, and just as the two Kalidas were nearly across, the tree fell with a crash into the gulf, carrying the ugly, snarling brutes with it, and both were dashed to pieces on sharp rocks at the bottom.
"Well,"
said the cowardly lion, drawing in a long breath of relief,
"I see we're going to live a little while longer. I'm glad of it. It must be a very uncomfortable thing not to be alive. Those creatures frightened me so badly, my heart's beating yet."
"Library, I just got this chair, man. You don't get to pick at the chair. Yeah, you can give me that look all you like. I just got this chair today. Come up here. Come up here. Sit with the people. There we go. That's better. Yeah, clearly I need to get a cover made for this chair, don't I? That actually won't be too bad. I could just kind of do like a drop pattern for this. Just drape a big chunk of fabric over it and cut where the seams are visibly in the actual thing. Really just getting a cover for the back made would be all I'd really have to do. Like the bit that I'm sitting on, the cats are unlikely to pick at. Library was just reaching up and stretching and kind of doing a little bit of pickies. So it'd probably be best if I get like a cover for the back of this made, and then kind of just like pin some, cat scratchable thing to the back of it. It's what I should have done with my last chair, and then I didn't, and the cats picked it to pieces. Anyway, I wish I had a heart to beat. This adventure made the travelers more anxious than ever to get out of the forest, and they walked on so fast that Dorothy became tired and had to ride on the lion's back. To their great joy, the trees became thinner the farther they advanced, and in the afternoon they suddenly came upon a broad river flowing swiftly just before them. On the other side of the water they could see the road of yellow brick running through a beautiful country with green meadows dotted with bright flowers, and all the road bordered with trees hanging full of delicious fruits. They were greatly pleased to see this delightful country before them. "How shall we cross the river?" "That is easily done. The Tin Woodman must build us a raft so we can float to the other side." And so the woodman took his axe and began to chop down small trees to make a raft. And while he was busy at this, the Scarecrow found on the river bank a tree full of fine fruit. This pleased Dorothy, who had eaten nothing but nuts all day. She made a hearty meal of the ripe fruit. But it takes time to make a raft, even when one is as industrious and untiring as the Tin Woodman, and when night came, the work was not done. So they found a cozy place under the trees, where they slept well until the morning, and Dorothy dreamed of the Emerald City and of the good Wizard Oz, who would soon send her back to her own home again. Yeah. Oh, nobody loved poor library. Nobody paid this little kitty cat any attention. Can you believe it? That's what he'd have you think. He'd say, "Oh, nobody pays me any mind." It's true. Could pet this man all day and he'd still be miffed when I stopped petting him. Wouldn't you? Yeah. Nobody pay the poor kitty cat any attention. Nobody pay him any mind. He'd just wander around yelling, don't you? Wander around full of puke. Anyway, let's dive into Chapter 8, The Deadly Poppy Field. Our little party of travelers awakened the next morning, refreshed and full of hope, and Dorothy breakfasted like a princess off peaches and plums from the trees beside the river. Behind them was the dark forest they'd passed safely through, although they had suffered many discouragements, but before them was a lovely, sunny country that seemed to beckon them on to the Emerald City. To be sure, the broad river now cut them off from the beautiful land, but the raft was nearly done, and after the Tin Woodsman had cut a few more logs and fastened them together with wooden pins, they were ready to start. Dorothy sat down in the middle of the raft and held Toto in her arms. When the Cowardly Lion stepped upon the raft, it tipped badly, for he was big and heavy, but the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman stood upon the other end to steady it, and they had long poles in their hands to push the raft through the water. They got along quite well at first, but when they reached the middle of the river, the swift current swept the raft downstream, farther and farther away from that road of yellow brick, and the water grew so deep that the long poles would not touch the bottom. "Now this is bad. If we can't get to land, we'll be carried into the country of the Wicked Witch of the West. She'll enchant us and make us her slaves." "And then I should get no brains."
Well, I should get no courage.
"And I should get no heart." "And I should never get back to Kansas." "We must certainly get to the Emerald City if we can," the Scarecrow continued, and he pushed so hard on his long pole that it got stuck fast in the mud at the bottom of the river. Then, before he could pull it out again or let go, the raft was swept away, and the poor Scarecrow was left clinging to the pole in the middle of the river. "Goodbye," he called after them, and they were very sorry to leave him. Indeed, the Tin Woodman began to cry, but fortunately remembered that he might rust, and so dried his tears upon Dorothy's apron. Of course, this was a bad thing for the Scarecrow. "I'm now worse off than when I first met Dorothy. There I was stuck on a pole in a cornfield where I could make believe scare the crows at any rate. But surely there's no use for a Scarecrow stuck on a pole in the middle of a river. I'm afraid I shall never have any brains at all." Down the stream the raft floated, and the poor Scarecrow was left far, far behind. Then the Lion said,
"Something must be done to save us. I think I can swim to shore and pull the raft after me if you'll hold fast to the tip of my tail."
and so he sprang into the water, and the Tin Woodsman caught fast hold of his tail. Then the Lion began to swim with all his might toward the shore. It was hard work, although he was so big, but by and by they were drawn out of the current, and then Dorothy took the Tin Woodsman's long pole and helped push the raft to land. They were all tired out when they reached the shore at last and stepped off upon the pretty green grass. They also knew that the stream had carried them a long way past the road of yellow brick that led to the Emerald City. "What shall we do now?" as the Lion lay down on the grass to let the sun dry him. "We must get back to the road in some way."
"The best plan'll be to walk along the river bank until we come to the road again."
So when they had rested, Dorothy picked up her basket and they started along the grassy bank to the road from which the river had carried them. It was a lovely country, with plenty of flowers and fruit trees and sunshine to cheer them, and had they not felt so sorry for the poor Scarecrow, they could have been very happy. They walked along as fast as they could, Dorothy only stopping once to pick a beautiful flower, and after a time the Tin Woodman cried out, "Look!" Then they all looked at the river and saw the Scarecrow perched upon his pole in the middle of the water, looking very lonely and very sad. "What can we do to save him?" The Lion and the Woodman both shook their heads, for they did not know. So they sat down upon the bank and gazed wistfully at the Scarecrow until a stork flew by, who, upon seeing them, stopped to rest at the water's edge.
"Who are you and where are you going?"
"I'm Dorothy. These are my friends, the Tin Woodman and the Cowardly Lion. We're going to the Emerald City."
"This isn't the road,"
said the stork as she twisted her long neck and looked sharply at the queer party.
"I know this, but we've lost the Scarecrow, and we're wondering how we shall get him again."
"Where is he?"
"Over there in the river."
"If he wasn't so big and heavy, I'd get him for you."
"Oh, but he isn't heavy a bit. He's stuffed with straw. If you bring him back to us, we shall thank you ever and ever so much."
"Well, I'll try. But if I find he's too big to carry, I'll have to drop him in the river again."
So the big bird flew into the air and over the water till she came to where the Scarecrow was perched upon his pole. Then the stork, with her great claws, grabbed the Scarecrow by the arm and carried him up and up into the air and back to the bank, where Dorothy and the Lion and the Tin Woodsman and Toto were sitting. When the Scarecrow found himself among his friends again, he was so happy that he hugged them all, even the Lion and Toto, and as they walked along he sang "To-di-di-di-di-di-o" at every step. He felt so gay.
"I was afraid I should have to stay in the river forever, but the kind stork saved me, and if I should ever get any brains, I shall find the stork again and do her some kindness in return."
"That's all right,"
said the stork, who was flying along beside them.
"I always like to help anyone in trouble. But I must go now. My babies are waiting in the nest. I hope you will find the Emerald City and that Oz will help you."
"Thank you,"
replied Dorothy, and then the kind stork flew into the air and was soon out of sight. They walked along, listening to the singing of the brightly colored birds and looking at the lovely flowers, which now became so thick that the ground was carpeted with them. They were big yellow and white and blue and purple blossoms, besides they were big yellow and white and blue and purple blossoms, beside great clusters of scarlet poppies, which were so brilliant in color they almost dazzled Dorothy's eyes.
"Aren't they beautiful?"
the girl asked as she breathed in the spicy scent of the bright flowers.
"I suppose so. When I have brains, I shall probably like them better."
"If only I had a heart, I'd love 'em."
I always did like flowers, but they always seem so helpless and frail. There's none in the forest as bright as these."
They now came upon more and more of the big scarlet poppies, and fewer of the other flowers, and soon they found themselves in the midst of a great meadow of poppies. Now it's well known that when there are many of these flowers together, their odor is so powerful that anyone breathes it falls asleep. And if the sleeper isn't carried away from the scent of the flowers, he sleeps on forever. But Dorothy didn't know this, nor could she get away from the bright red flowers that were everywhere about. So presently her eyes grew heavy, and she felt that she must sit down to rest and to sleep. But the Tin Woodman would not let her do this. "We must hurry and get back to the road of yellow brick before dark." And the Scarecrow agreed with him. So they kept walking until Dorothy could stand no longer. Her eyes closed in spite of herself, and she forgot where she was and fell among the poppies, fast asleep. "What shall we do?"
"If we leave her here, she'll die. The smell of the flowers is killing us all. I can barely keep my eyes open and the dog's asleep already."
It was true. Toto had fallen down beside his little mistress, but the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman, not being made of flesh, were not so troubled by the scent of the flowers.
Run fast and get out of this deadly flower bed as soon as you can. We'll bring the little girl with us, but if you should fall asleep, you're too big to be carried.
So the lion roused himself and bounded forward as fast as he could go. In a moment he was out of sight.
Let us make a chair with our hands and carry her, said the Scarecrow.
And so they picked up Toto and put the dog in Dorothy's lap. Then they made a chair with their hands for the seat and the arms for the arms, and carried the sleeping girl between them through the flowers. On and on they walked, and it seemed that the great carpet of deadly flowers that surrounded them would never end. They followed the bend of the river, and at last came upon their friend the lion lying fast asleep among the poppies. The flowers had been too strong for the huge beast, and he'd given up at last, and fallen only a short distance from the end of the poppy bed, with the sweet grass spread in beautiful green fields before them. We can do nothing for him. He's much too heavy to lift. We gotta leave him here to sleep on forever. Perhaps he'd dream that he found his courage.
I'm sorry. The lion was a very good comrade for one so cowardly, but let us go on.
And they carried the sleeping girl to a pretty spot beside the river, far enough from the poppy field to prevent her breathing any more of the poison of the flowers, and here they laid her gently on the soft grass and waited for the fresh breeze to waken her. Okay. No, I'll do one more chapter. Chapter 9, The Queen of the Field Mice.
We cannot be far from the road of yellow brick now,
remarked the Scarecrow as he stood beside the girl,
for we've come nearly as far as the river carried us away.
The Tin Woodman was about to reply when he heard a low growl, and turning his head, which worked beautifully on hinges, he saw a strange beast come bounding over the grass toward them. It was indeed a great yellow wildcat, and the woodman thought it must be chasing something, for its ears were lying close to its head, and its mouth was wide open, showing 2 rows of ugly teeth, while its red eyes glowed like balls of fire. As it came nearer, the Tin Woodman saw that running before the beast was a little gray field mouse, and although he had no heart, he knew it was wrong for the wildcat to try and kill such a pretty harmless creature. So the woodsman raised his axe, and as the wildcat ran by, he gave it a quick blow that cut the beast's head clean off from its body, and it rolled over at his feet in 2 clean pieces. The field mouse, now that it was freed from its enemy, stopped short, and coming slowly up to the woodman, it said in a squeaky little voice, "Oh, I tried to squeak a little too high there."
Oh, thank you. Thank you ever so much for saving my life.
Now, don't speak of it. I beg you. I beg you, don't speak of it. I have no heart, you know, so I'm careful to help any of those who may need a friend, even if it happens to be only a mouse.
Only a mouse,
cried the little animal indignantly.
Why, I'm a queen. I'm a queen of all the field mice.
Oh, indeed, said the woodman, making a bow.
Therefore you have done a great deed, as well as a brave one, in saving my life.
At that moment, several mice were seen running up as fast as their little legs would carry them, and when they saw their queen, they exclaimed,
"Oh, your majesty, we thought you'd be killed. How did you manage to escape the great wildcat?"
They all bowed so low to the little queen, they almost stood upon their heads.
This funny little tin man killed the wildcat and saved my life, so hereafter you must all serve him and obey his slightest wish. We will,
cried all the mice in a shrill chorus, and then they scampered in all directions, for Toto had awakened from his sleep, and seeing all these mice around him, gave one bark of delight and jumped right into the middle of the group. Toto had always loved to chase mice when he lived in Kansas, and he saw no harm in it. But the Tin Woodman caught the dog in his arms and held him tight, while he called to the mice. Come back, Toto shall not hurt you." At this, the Queen of the Mice stuck her head out from underneath a clump of grass and asked, in a timid voice,
"Are you sure he will not bite us?"
"I won't let it. Don't be afraid." One by one, the mice came creeping back, and Toto didn't bark again, although he tried to get out of the woodsman's arms, and would have bitten him had he not known very well he was made of tin. Finally, one of the biggest mice spoke.
Is there anything we can do to repay you for saving the life of our queen?
Nothing I know of. But the Scarecrow had been trying to think, but couldn't, because his head was stuffed with straw, said quickly, "Oh, yes, you can save our friend, the Cowardly Lion, who's asleep in the poppy bed."
A lion? Oh, he eat us all up.
Well, no, this lion's a coward.
Really?
Well, he says so himself, and he'd never hurt anyone who's our friend. If you'll help us to save him, I promise he shall treat you all with kindness.
Very well, we trust you. But what shall we do?
Are there many of these mice which call you queen and are willing to obey you?
Oh, yes, thousands.
Then send for 'em all to come here as soon as possible. You let each one bring a long piece of string. The queen turned to her mice that attended her and told them to go at once and get all her people. As soon as they heard her orders, they ran away in every direction as fast as possible.
Now you must go to those trees by the riverside, and make a truck that'll carry the lion.
So the woodman went at once to the trees and began to work, and soon he made a truck out of the limbs of the trees, which he chopped away all the leaves and branches. He fastened it together with wooden pegs and made the 4 wheels out of short pieces of a big tree trunk. So fast and so well did he work that by the time the mice began to arrive, the truck was all ready for them. They came from all directions, and there were thousands of them, big mice and little mice and middle-sized mice besides. Each one brought a piece of string in his mouth. It was about this time that Dorothy woke from her long sleep and opened her eyes. She was greatly astonished to find herself lying upon the grass, with thousands of mice standing around and looking at her timidly. But the Scarecrow told her about everything, and turning to the dignified little mouse, he said,
Permit me to introduce you to Her Majesty the Queen.
Dorothy nodded gravely, and the Queen made a curtsy, after which she became quite friendly with the little girl. The Scarecrow and the Woodman now began to fasten the mice to the truck, using the strings they'd brought. One end of a string was tied round the neck of each mouse, and the other end the truck. Of course, the truck was 1,000 times bigger than any of the individual mice were to draw it, but when all the mice had been harnessed, they were able to pull it quite easily. Even the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman could sit on it, and were drawn swiftly by their queer little horses to the place where the lion lay asleep. After a great deal of hard work, for the lion was heavy, they managed to get him up on the truck. Then the Queen hurriedly gave her people the order to start, for she feared if the mice stayed among the poppies too long, they would also fall asleep. At first the little creatures, many though they were, could hardly stir the heavily loaded truck, but the Woodman and the Scarecrow both pushed from behind, and then they got along better. Soon they rolled the lion out of the poppy bed to the green fields, where he could breathe the sweet fresh air again, instead of the poisonous scent of the flowers. Dorothy came to meet them, and thanked the little mice warmly for saving her companion from death. She'd grown so fond of the big lion, she was glad he had been rescued. Then the mice were unharnessed from the truck, and scampered away through the grass to their homes. The Queen of the Mice was last to leave.
If you ever need us again, come out into the field and call for us. We shall hear you and come to your assistance. Goodbye.
Goodbye, they all answered, and away the Queen ran, while Dorothy held Toto tightly, lest he should run after her and frighten her. After this they sat down beside the lion until he should awaken, and the Scarecrow brought Dorothy some fruit from a tree nearby, which she ate for her dinner. All right, I think before we dive into Chapter 10 here, we're going to take a little intermission. Usually intermissions around here take about 15 minutes. It's a great time if you've been sitting along with me to get up, stretch your legs, make sure you get your blood moving. It is absolutely an incredible time to get hydrated. If you haven't been drinking your water, it's very important that you continue to drink your water. Your body needs water. If you've got any medications you need to take, heartily suggest taking those. Definitely pet your pets for me. And if you do pet your pets for me, I also heartily suggest you come over to the Discord and post some pictures of those pets in the Discord. I am going to go grab some water and stretch my legs and do all my fun little BRB tasks. We will be back in, at most, 15 minutes, so keep an eye on the stream. And don't antagonize the mods too much. Enjoy a little bit of I think. Actually, you know what else wouldn't get me dinged? This shouldn't get me dinged. Enjoy a little bit of a high school band that I found, or some music while I'm at it. Be good. go. Perfect point to end off. Uh, Actually found that in a thrift store local to my hometown. And it is a presumably high school or middle school band. They actually won. They won like first honors at a competition. I could pull out the record and check the liner notes, but I'll post that in Discord. Or actually, I did post that in Discord a while back. So that's something really. Like I said, I've been trying to be better about posting things in the Discord, and one of the things I posted was when I was doing the reading this record into my computer, I found in the little record sleeve, the only other thing in there other than the vinyl was a little liner note that said the 1976-1977 Whiteford High School Concert Band, winner of first division rating at the Class D State Festival, and then a list of students who played in the band. And you can tell that they really earned that first division rating. That's not bad work at all. Some very nice dynamic control. Very good balance. Obviously, it's a little hard to, presume proper understanding of the balance of a band when it's been recorded like that, when you don't know how good the recording is. But I'd say they were doing very well. It was a very pleasant surprise to find for sure. I tend to be someone who, one of the biggest things I collect, uh, as far as physical items go, is vinyl of essentially ephemeral vinyl is the best way I can describe it. And this was a very lovely find. It was actually quite a pleasant little find. I was not expecting it to be good. I was like, oh man, it's a school band. It's a high school band. I don't know, y'all. I don't know if it's any good. And it turned out to be quite good, actually. I was very pleasantly surprised. Anyway, let's flip back over the book here. Let me get a little sippy sip in, and then we can begin. Sorry, easily distracted. I opened my phone to check if I had gotten any little Twitch redeems, and then I immediately got distracted by a notification. No more notification. Bonk bonk. Let us continue our little book here, our little journey through the land of Oz, as we start in on chapter 10, The Guardian of the Gate. It was some time before the Cowardly Lion awakened, for he had lain among the poppies a long while, breathing in their deadly fragrance. But when he did open his eyes and roll off the truck, he was very glad to find himself still alive.
Well, I ran as fast as I could, but the flowers... the flowers were too strong for me. How'd you get me out?
Then they told him of the field mice and how they had generously saved him from death, and the Cowardly Lion laughed and said,
But I've always thought of myself very big and terrible, yet such little things as flowers came pretty near to killing me, and such small animals as mice have saved my life. How strange it all is, but comrades, what shall we do now?
We must journey on until we find the road of yellow brick again, and then we can keep on to the Emerald City. So the lion, having been fully refreshed by his little nap, and feeling quite himself again, they all started upon the journey, greatly enjoying the walk through the soft, fresh grass. And it was not long before they reached the road of yellow brick, and turned again toward the Emerald City, where the great Oz dwelt. The road was smooth and well paved once more now, and the country about was beautiful, so that the travelers rejoiced in leaving the forest far behind, and with it the many dangers they had met in its gloomy shades. Once more they could see fences built beside the road, but these were painted green, and evidently when they came to a small house, or rather, uh, and when they came to a small house, let's try that whole sentence again, shall we? Once more they could see fences built beside the road, but these were painted green, and when they came to a small house, in which a farmer evidently lived, that was also painted green. They passed by several of these houses during the afternoon, and sometimes people came to the doors and looked at them as if they would like to ask questions, but no one came near them nor spoke to them because of the great lion, of which they were very much afraid. These people were all dressed in clothing of a lovely emerald green color, and wore peaked hats just like those the Munchkins did.
This must be the land of Oz. We're surely getting near the Emerald City.
Yes, everything is green here, while in the country, the Munchkins, blue was their favorite color. But the people do not seem to be as friendly as the Munchkins, and I'm afraid we shall be unable to find a place to pass the night.
I should like something to eat besides fruit, and I'm sure Toto is nearly starved. Let us stop at the next house and talk to the people.
So when they came up to a good-sized farmhouse, Dorothy walked boldly up to the door and knocked. A woman opened it just far enough to look out and said,
"What do you want, child? Was the great lion with you?"
We wish to pass the night with you, if you'll allow us, and the lion is my friend and comrade. Wouldn't hurt you for the world.
Is he tame?
Oh, yes, he's a great coward, too. He'll be more afraid of you than you are of him.
Well,
said the woman, after thinking it over and taking another peep at the lion,
if that is the case, you may come in, and I'll give you some supper and a place to sleep.
So they all entered the house where there were, besides the woman, 2 children and a man. The man had hurt his leg and was lying on the couch in a corner. They seemed greatly surprised to see so strange a company, and while the woman was busy laying the table, the man asked,
"Where are you all going?"
To the Emerald City, to see the Great Oz.
"Oh, indeed. Are you sure that the Oz will see you?"
Oh, why not?
"Why, it's said that he never lets anyone come into his presence. I've been to the Emerald City many times, and it's a beautiful and wonderful place, but I've never been permitted to see the Great Oz, nor do I know of any living person who's seen him."
Does he never go out?
"Never. He sits day after day in the great throne room of his palace, and even those who wait upon him do not see him face to face."
What's he like?
"That is hard to tell. You see, Oz is a great wizard and can take on any form he wishes. So some say he looks like a bird, and some say he looks like an elephant, some say he looks like a cat. To others he appears as a beautiful fairy, or a brownie, or in any other form that pleases him. But who the real Oz is, when he is in his own form, well, that no living person can tell."
That's very strange, but we must try in some way to see him, or we shall have made our journey for nothing.
"Why do you wish to see the terrible Oz?"
I want him to give me some brains, said the Scarecrow eagerly.
"Oh, Oz could do that easily enough."
Library. Buddy, you can stand back there. It is allowed. But clearly I need to put a little cover on the back of this chair, so little men do not ruin the nice fabric of the chair. Anyway,
"Oh, Oz could do that easily enough. He's got far more brains than he needs."
and I want him to give me a heart. Library, do not pick at that. Come here. Buddy, we don't pick at this chair. I just got it today. Okay? Clearly I need to make a little fabric cover for this weekend, so babies do not destroy the nice chair. And I want him to give me a heart.
That will not trouble him, for Oz has a large collection of hearts of all sizes and shapes.
And I want him to give me courage.
Oz keeps a great pot of courage in his throne room, which he has covered with golden plate to keep it from running over. He'll be glad to give you some."
And I want him to send me back to Kansas.
"Where is Kansas?"
I don't know, but it is my home, and I'm sure it's somewhere.
"Very likely.
Well, Oz can do anything, so I suppose he'll find Kansas for you. But first you must get to see him, and that will be a hard task, for the Great Wizard does not like to see anyone, and he usually has his own way. But what do you want?" he continued, speaking to Toto. Toto only wagged his tail, for, strange to say it, he couldn't speak. The woman now called to them that supper was ready, so they gathered round the table, and Dorothy ate some delicious porridge and a dish of scrambled eggs and a plate of nice white bread, and enjoyed her meal. The lion ate some of the porridge, but did not care for it, saying it was made from oats, and oats were food for horses, not lions. The Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman ate nothing at all. Toto ate a little of everything, and was glad to get a good supper again. The woman now gave Dorothy a bed to sleep in, and Toto lay down beside her, while the lion guarded the door of her room, so she might not be disturbed. The Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman stood up in a corner and kept quiet all night, although, of course, they would not sleep. The next morning, as soon as the sun was up, they started on their way, and soon saw a beautiful green glow in the sky just before them.
"That must be the Emerald City."
As they walked on, the green glow became brighter and brighter, and it seemed at last they were nearing the end of their travels. Yet it was afternoon before they came to the great wall that surrounded the city. It was high and thick and of a bright green color. In front of them, and at the end of the road of yellow brick, was a big gate, all studded with emeralds that glittered so in the sun that even the painted eyes of the Scarecrow were dazzled by their brilliancy. There was a bell beside the gate, and Dorothy pushed the button and heard a silvery tinkling sound within. Then the big gate swung slowly open, and they all passed through and found themselves in a high arched room, the walls of which glistened with countless emeralds. Before them stood a little man about the same size as the Munchkins. He was clothed all in green from his head to his feet, and even his skin was of a greenish tint. At his side was a large green box. When he saw Dorothy and her companions, the man asked,
"What do you wish in the Emerald City?"
"We came to see the Great Oz." The man was so surprised at this answer that he sat down to think it over.
"It has been many years since anybody asked me to see Oz,"
he said, shaking his head in his perplexion.
"He's powerful and terrible. If you come on an idle or foolish errand to bother the wise reflections of the Great Wizard, he might be angry and destroy you all in an instant."
"But it is not a foolish errand, nor an idle one. It is important, and we've been told that Oz is a good wizard."
So he is, and he rules the Emerald City wisely and well, but to those who are not honest, or who approach him from curiosity, he is most terrible, and few have ever dared to see his face. I am the guardian of the gates. Since you demand to see the Great Oz, I must take you to his palace, but first you must put on the spectacles."
"Why?"
"Because if you did not wear the spectacles, the brightness and the glory of the Emerald City would blind you. Even those who live in the city must wear spectacles night and day. They're all locked on, for Oz so ordered it when the city was first built, and I have the only key that will unlock them."
He opened the big box, and Dorothy saw that it was filled with spectacles of every size and shape. All of them had green glasses in them. The guardian of the gates found a pair that would just fit Dorothy and put them over her eyes. There were 2 golden bands fastened to them that passed around the back of her head, where they were locked together by a little key that was the end of a chain the guardian of the gates wore round his neck. When they were on, Dorothy could not take them off had she wished, but of course she did not wish to be blinded by the glare of the Emerald City, and so she said nothing. Then the Green Man fitted spectacles for the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman and the Lion, and even on little Toto, and all were locked fast with the key. Then the guardian of the gates put on his own glasses and told them he was ready to show them to the palace. Taking a big golden key from a peg on the wall, he opened another gate, and they all followed him through the portal into the streets of the Emerald City. Chapter 11. The Wonderful City of Oz. Even with eyes protected by green spectacles, Dorothy and her friends were at first dazzled by the brilliancy of the wonderful city. The streets were lined with beautiful houses, all built of green marble and studded everywhere with sparkling emeralds. They walked over a pavement of the same green marble, and where the blocks were joined together were rows of emeralds set closely and glittering in the brightness of the sun. The window panes were of green glass. Even the sky above the city had a green tint, and the rays of the sun were green. There were many people, men, women, and children, walking about, and these were all dressed in green clothes and had greenish skin. They looked at Dorothy and her strangely assorted company with wondering eyes, and the children all ran away and hid behind their mothers when they saw the lion, but no one spoke to them. Many shops stood in the street, and Dorothy saw that everything in them was green. Green candy and green popcorn were offered for sale, as well as green shoes, green hats, green clothes of all sorts. At one place, a man was selling green lemonade, and when the children bought it, Dorothy could see that they paid for it with green pennies. There seemed to be no horses, nor animals of any kind. The men carried things around in little green carts which they pushed before them. Everyone seemed happy and contented and prosperous. The guardian of the gates led them through the streets until they came to a big building exactly in the middle of the city, which was the palace of Oz, the great wizard. There was a soldier before the door, dressed in a green uniform and wearing a long green beard.
"Here are strangers," said the guardian of the gates to him. "They demand to see the great Oz."
"Step aside, and I will carry your message to him,"
answered the soldier. So they passed through the palace gates and were led into a big room with a green carpet and lovely green furniture set with emeralds. The soldier made them all wipe their feet upon a green mat before entering this room, and when they were seated, he said politely,
"Please make yourselves comfortable while I go to the door of the throne room and tell Oz you are here."
They had to wait a long time before the soldier returned, and when at last he came back, Dorothy asked, "Have you seen Oz?"
"Oh, no. I've never seen him, but I spoke to him as he sat behind his screen and gave him your message. He said he will grant you an audience if you so desire, but each one of you must enter his presence alone, and he will admit but one each day. Therefore, as you must remain in the palace for several days, I will have you shown to rooms where you may rest in comfort after your long journey."
"Thank you. That's very kind of Oz." The soldier now blew upon a green whistle, and at once a young girl, dressed in a pretty green silk gown, entered the room. She had lovely green hair and green eyes, and she bowed low before Dorothy as she said, "Follow me, and I will show you to your room." So Dorothy said goodbye to all her friends except Toto, and taking the dog in her arms, followed the green girl through 7 passages and up 3 flights of stairs until they came to a room at the front of the palace. It was the sweetest little room in the world, with a comfortable bed that had sheets of green silk and a green velvet counterpane. There was a tiny fountain in the middle of the room that shot a spray of green perfume into the air to fall back into a beautifully carved green marble basin. Beautiful green flowers stood in the windows. There was a shelf with a row of little green books. When Dorothy had time to open these books, she found them full of queer green pictures that made her laugh, they were so funny. In a wardrobe there were many green dresses made of silk and satin and velvet, and all of them fitted Dorothy exactly.
"Make yourself perfectly at home, and if you wish for anything, ring the bell. Oz will send for you tomorrow morning,"
said the green girl. She left Dorothy alone and went back to the others. These she also led to rooms, and each one of them found himself lodged in a very pleasant part of the palace. Of course, this politeness was wasted on the Scarecrow, for when he found himself alone in his room, he just stood stupidly in one spot, just within the doorway, to wait until morning. It wouldn't rest him to lie down, he couldn't close his eyes, so he remained all night staring at a little spider which was weaving its web in a corner of the room, just as if it were not one of the most wonderful rooms in the world. The Tin Woodman lay down on his bed from force of habit, for he remembered when he was made of flesh, but not being able to sleep, he passed the night moving his joints up and down to make sure they kept in good working order. The lion would have preferred a bed of dried leaves in the forest, and didn't much like being shut up in a room, but he had too much sense to let this worry him, and so he sprang upon the bed and rolled himself up like a cat, and purred himself asleep in a minute. The next morning, after breakfast, the Green Maiden came to fetch Dorothy, and she dressed her in one of the prettiest gowns, made of green brocaded satin. Dorothy put on a green silk apron and tied a green ribbon around Toto's neck, and they started for the throne room of the great Oz. First they came to a great hall in which there were many ladies and gentlemen of the court, all dressed in rich costumes. These people had nothing to do but talk to each other, but they always came to wait outside the throne room every morning, although they were never permitted to see Oz. As Dorothy entered, they looked at her curiously, and one of them whispered,
"Are you really going to look upon the face of Oz the Terrible?"
Of course, if you'll see me.
"Oh, he'll see you,"
said the soldier who had taken her message to the wizard.
"although he does not like to have people ask to see him. Indeed, at first he was angry, and said I should send you back where you came from. Then he asked me what you looked like, and when I mentioned your silver shoes, he was very much interested. At last I told him about the mark upon your forehead, and he decided he would admit you to his presence."
Just then a bell rang, and the green girl said to Dorothy,
"That is the signal. You must go into the throne room alone."
She opened a little door, and Dorothy walked boldly through and found herself in a wonderful place. It was a big, round room with a high, arched roof, and the walls and ceiling and floor were covered with large emeralds set closely together. In the center of the roof was a great light as bright as the sun, which made the emeralds sparkle in a wonderful manner. But what interested Dorothy most was the big throne of green marble that stood in the middle of the room. It was shaped like a chair and sparkled with gems, as did everything else. In the center of the chair was an enormous head, without a body to support it or any arms or legs whatsoever. There was no hair upon the head, but it had eyes and a nose and a mouth, and was much bigger than the head of the largest giant. As Dorothy gazed upon this in wonder and fear, the eyes turned slowly and looked at her, sharply and steadily. Then the mouth moved, and Dorothy heard a voice say,
I am Oz, great and terrible. Who are you, and why do you seek me?
It was not such an awful voice as she had expected to come from the big head, so she took courage and answered,
"I am Dorothy, the small and meek. I've come to you for your help."
The eyes looked at her thoughtfully for a full minute, then said the voice,
Where did you get the silver shoes?
"I got them from the Wicked Witch of the East when my house fell on her and killed her."
Where did you get the mark upon your forehead?
"That's where the Good Witch of the North kissed me, when she bade me goodbye and sent me to you."
Again the eyes looked at her sharply, and they saw that she was telling the truth. Then Oz asked,
What do you wish me to do?
"Send me back to Kansas, where my Aunt Em and my Uncle Henry are. I don't like your country, although it's so beautiful. I'm sure Aunt Em will be dreadfully worried about my being away so long."
The eyes winked one after another 3 times, and then they turned up to the ceiling and down to the floor and rolled around so queerly they seemed to see every part of the room, and at last they looked at Dorothy again.
Why should I do this for you?
"Oh, because you're strong and I'm weak. Because you're a great wizard and I'm only a little girl."
But you were strong enough to kill the Wicked Witch of the East.
"Oh, that just happened. I couldn't help it."
Well, I will give you my answer. You have no right to expect me to send you back to Kansas unless you do something for me in return. In this country, everyone must pay for everything he gets. If you wish me to use my magic power to send you home again, you must do something for me first. Help me, and I will help you.
"What must I do?"
Kill the Wicked Witch of the West.
"But I cannot."
You killed the Witch of the East, you wears the silver shoes.
Oh, little sneeze, Magnus. You okay? Just doing her all, that's all? We all good? We get our sneezes?
Okay.
You killed the Wicked Witch of the East, and you wear the silver shoes which bear a powerful charm. There is now but one Wicked Witch left in all this land, and when you can tell me she is dead, I will send you back to Kansas, but not a moment before."
The little girl began to weep. She was so much disappointed, and the eyes winked one by one again, and looked upon her anxiously, as if the great Oz felt that she could help him if she would. "I never have killed anything willingly, even if I wanted to. How would I kill the wicked witch? If you who are great and terrible cannot kill her yourself, how do you expect me to do it?"
"I do not know, but that is my answer. Until the wicked witch dies, you will not see your aunt and uncle again. Remember that the witch is wicked, tremendously wicked, and ought to be killed. Now go, and do not ask to see me again until you have completed your task."
Sorrowfully, Dorothy left the throne room and went back where the lion and the scarecrow and the Tin Woodman were waiting to hear what Oz had said to her. "There's no hope for me. Oz will not send me home until I've killed the Wicked Witch of the West, and that I can never do." Her friends were sorry, but could do nothing to help her, and so Dorothy went to her own room and lay down on the bed and cried herself to sleep. The next morning the soldier with the green whiskers came to the scarecrow and said,
"Come with me, for Oz has sent for you."
So the scarecrow followed him and was admitted into the great throne room, where he saw, sitting in the emerald throne, a most lovely lady. She was dressed in green silk gauze, and wore upon her flowing green locks a crown of jewels. Growing from her shoulders were wings, gorgeous in color, and so light that they fluttered if the slightest breath of air reached them. When the scarecrow had bowed, as prettily as his straw stuffing would let him, before this beautiful creature, she looked upon him sweetly and said,
"I am Oz."
"No, I am Oz, the great and terrible. Who are you, and why do you seek me?" Now the scarecrow, who had expected to see the great head Dorothy had told him of, was much astonished, but he answered her bravely. "I am only a scarecrow, stuffed with straw. Therefore I have no brains, and I come to you praying that you will put brains in my head instead of straw, so that I may become as much a man as any other in your dominions." "And why should I do this for you?" "Because you are wise and powerful, and no one else can help me." "I never grant favors without some return, but this much will I promise. If you will kill for me the Wicked Witch of the West, I will bestow upon you a great many brains, such good brains that you'll be the wisest man in all the land of Oz." "I thought you asked Dorothy to kill the witch." "So I did. I don't care who kills her, but until she's dead, I won't grant your wish either. Now go, and do not seek me again until you've earned the brains you've so greatly desire." The scarecrow went sorrowfully back to his friends and told them what Oz had said, and Dorothy was surprised to find the great wizard was not a head as she had seen him, but a lovely lady. All the same, she needs a heart just as much as the Tin Woodman. On the next morning, the soldier with the green whiskers came to the Tin Woodman and said,
"Oz has sent for you. Follow me."
So the Tin Woodman followed him and came to the great throne room. He did not know whether he would find Oz a lovely lady or a head, but he hoped it would be the lovely lady. "For if it's the head, I'm sure I shall not be given a heart, since a head's got no heart of its own, and therefore can't feel for me. But, well, if it's a lovely lady, I should beg hard for a heart. All ladies themselves are said to be kindly hearted." But when the Woodman entered the great throne room, he saw neither the head nor the lady, for Oz had taken the shape of a most terrible beast. It was nearly as big as an elephant, and the green throne seemed hardly strong enough to hold its weight. The beast had a head like that of a rhinoceros, only there were 5 eyes in its face. There were 5 long arms growing out of its body, and it also had 5 long, slim legs. Thick, woolly hair covered every part of it, and a more dreadful-looking monster could not be imagined. It was fortunate the Tin Woodman had no heart at that moment, for it would have beat loud and fast from terror. But, being only tin, the Woodman was not at all afraid, although he was much disappointed.
"I was the great and terrible.
spoke the beast in a voice that was one great roar.
Who are you, and why do you seek me?
Well, I am a woodman, and I'm made of tin. Therefore I haven't got any heart, and I cannot love. Pray you to give me a heart, that I may be as other men are.
Why should I do this?
Well, because I ask it. You're the only one that can grant my request. Oz gave a low growl at this, but said gruffly,
If you indeed desire a heart, you must earn it.
How?
Help Dorothy to kill the Wicked Witch of the West. When the witch is dead, come to me, and then I will give you the biggest and kindest and most loving heart in all the land of Oz.
So the Tin Woodman was forced to return sorrowfully to his friends and tell them of the terrible beast he'd seen. They all wondered greatly at the many forms the great wizard could take upon himself, and the Lion said,
If he's a beast when I go to see him, I shall roar my loudest, and so frighten him he will grant all I ask. If he's the lovely lady, I shall pretend to spring upon her and compel her to do my bidding. If he's the great head, he'll be at my mercy, for I'll roll the head all about the room until he promises to give us what we desire. Be of good cheer, my friends, all yet be well.
The next morning, the soldier with the green whiskers led the Lion to the great throne room and bade him enter the presence of Oz. The Lion at once passed through the door, and glancing around, saw to his surprise that before the throne was a ball of fire, so fierce and glowing he could scarcely bear to gaze upon it. His first thought was that Oz had by accident caught on fire and was burning up, but when he tried to go nearer, the heat was so intense that it singed his whiskers, and he crept back tremblingly to a spot nearer the door. Then a low, quiet voice came from the ball of fire, and these are the words it spoke.
I am Oz, the great and terrible. Why do you seek me?
And the Lion answered,
Well, I'm a cowardly lion, afraid of everything. I come to you to beg that you give me some courage, so that in reality I may become the King of the King of Keys. Well, rather the King of Beasts, as men call me. Why should I give you courage? Because of all wizards, you're the greatest, and you alone have the power to grant my request.
the ball of fire burned fiercely for a time. Thank you for the Foley, Magnus. I appreciate it. And the voice said,
Bring me proof that the Wicked Witch is dead, and at that moment I will give you courage. But as long as the witch lives, you must remain a coward.
The Lion was angry at this speech, but could say nothing in reply. While he stood silently gazing at the ball of fire, it became so furiously hot that he turned tail and rushed from the room. He was glad to find his friends waiting for him, and told them of his terrible interview with the wizard. What shall we do now?
There's only one thing we can do. That's to go to the land of the Winkies, seek out the Wicked Witch, and destroy her.
But suppose we cannot?
Then I shall never have my courage.
And I shall never have my brains. Oh, and I should never have a heart.
I shall never see Auntie Em and Uncle Henry,
said Dorothy, beginning to cry.
Be careful,
cried the green girl.
the tears will fall on your green silk gown and spot it.
So Dorothy dried her eyes and said,
I suppose we must try it, but I'm sure I don't want to kill anybody, even to see Auntie Em again.
I'll go with you, but I'm too much of a coward to kill the witch.
Sorry, something was on fire on my phone. Had to address that. Anyway,
I'm too much of a coward to kill the witch.
I'll go too, but I shall not be of much help to you. I'm such a fool. I haven't the heart to harm even a witch, but if you go, I shall certainly go with you. Therefore, it was decided to start upon their journey the next morning, and the woodman sharpened his axe on a green grindstone and had all his joints properly oiled. The Scarecrow stuffed himself with fresh straw, and Dorothy put new paint on his eyes that he might see better. The green girl, who was very kind to them, filled Dorothy's basket with good things to eat, and fastened a little bell around Toto's neck with a green ribbon. They went to bed quite early and slept soundly until daylight, when they were awakened by the crowing of a green cock that lived in the backyard of the palace, and the cackling of a hen that had laid a green egg. It's so funny to be reading this and like there's a bunch of words that have just experienced a massive amount of semantic like drift. Like it's funny. But this is also like wow, the movie is super spot on. Like as I've been reading this, I've been thinking like what's different from this in the movie? Really only other than like gray rather than sepia in the opening scene and like uh the like there's had some scenes like moved around just to like make them not take quite so long. It's like oh everybody went in to see Oz at once instead of everyone in a row and like there's that whole scene with the they like replaced the scene of getting the goggles locked onto their heads with like the horse of many colors sequence. So like that's this is really like the movie's really quite spot on. It's telling practically speaking the same story. It's just making a few adaptationary changes. The Search for the Wicked Witch. Chapter 12. The soldier with the green whiskers led them through the streets of Emerald City until they reached the room where the guardian of the gates lived. This officer unlocked their spectacles to put them back in his great box, and he politely opened the gate for our friends.
Well, which road leads to the Wicked Witch of the West?
There is no road, answered the guardian of the gates. No one ever wishes to go that way.
How then are we to find her?
That'll be easy. When she knows you're in the country of the Winkies, she'll find you and make you all her slaves. Perhaps not, for we mean to destroy her. Well, that's different. No one's ever destroyed her before, so I naturally thought she'd make slaves of you as she has of the rest, but take care. She's wicked and fierce, may not allow you to destroy her. Keep to the west where the sun sets, and you cannot fail to find her. They thanked him and bade him goodbye, and turned toward the west, walking over fields of soft grass dotted here and there with daisies and buttercups. Dorothy still wore the pretty silk dress she'd put on in the palace, but now to her surprise she found it was no longer green, but pure white. The ribbon around Toto's neck had also lost its green color, and was as white as Dorothy's dress. The Emerald City was soon left far behind. Excuse me. Sorry about that. The Emerald City was soon left far behind. As they advanced, the ground became rougher and hilly. Whoa. Oh, man. So sorry. My insides are not agreeing with this particular passage, apparently. Anyway, the Emerald City was soon left far behind. As they advanced, the ground became rougher and hillier, for there were no farms nor houses in this country of the West, and the ground was untilled. In the afternoon the sun shone hot in their faces, for there were no trees to offer them shade, so that before night Dorothy and Toto and the lion were tired, and lay down upon the grass and fell asleep with the woodsman and the scarecrow keeping watch. Now the Wicked Witch of the West had but one eye, yet it was as powerful as a telescope, and could see everywhere. So as she sat in the door of her castle, she happened to look around and saw Dorothy lying asleep with her friends all about her. They were a long distance off, but the Wicked Witch was angry to find them in her country, so she blew upon a silver whistle that hung around her neck. At once there came running to her from all directions a pack of great wolves. They had long legs and fierce eyes and sharp teeth.
Go to those people and tear them to pieces.
Are you not going to make them your slaves?
Asked the leader of the wolves.
No. One is of tin and one of straw, one is a girl and another a lion. None of them is fit to work. You may tear them into small pieces, said the witch.
Very well, said the wolf, and he dashed away at full speed, followed by the others. It was lucky the scarecrow and the woodman were wide awake, and heard the wolves coming. "Now this is my fight. Get behind me. I'll meet 'em as they come at me." He seized his axe, which he'd made very sharp. As the leader of the wolves came on, the Tin Woodman swung his arm and chopped the wolf's head from its body, so that it immediately died. As soon as he could raise his axe, another wolf came up, and he also fell into the sharp edge of the Tin Woodsman's weapon. There were 40 wolves, and 40 times a wolf had killed, or rather, 40 times there were. Let's try that again. There were 40 wolves, and 40 times a wolf was killed, so at last they all lay dead in a heap before the woodsman. Then he put down his axe and sat behind the Scarecrow, who said, "That was a good fight, friend." They waited until Dorothy awoke the next morning. The little girl was quite frightened when she saw the great pile of shaggy wolves, but the Tin Woodman told her the whole story. She thanked him for saving them and sat down to breakfast, after which they started again upon their journey. Now, this same morning, the Wicked Witch came to the door of her castle, and looked out with her one eye that could see from afar. She saw all her wolves lying dead, and the strangers still traveling through her country. This made her angrier than before, and she blew her silver whistle twice. Straightway, a great flock of wild crows came flying toward her, enough to darken the sky. And the Wicked Witch said to the King Crow,
"Fly at once to the strangers, peck out their eyes, and tear them to pieces."
The wild crows flew in one great flock toward Dorothy and her companions. When the little girl saw them coming, she was afraid. But the Scarecrow said, "This is my battle. Lie down beside me, and you will not be harmed." So they all lay down upon the ground, except the Scarecrow, and he stood up and stretched out his arms. And when the crows saw him, they were frightened, as birds always are by scarecrows, and didn't dare to come any nearer. But the King Crow said, "It's only a stuffed man. I'll peck his eyes out." The King Crow flew at the Scarecrow, who caught it by the head and twisted its neck until it died. Then another crow flew at him, and the Scarecrow twisted its neck also. There were 40 crows, and indeed 40 times the Scarecrow twisted a neck, till at last all were lying dead beside him. Then he called to his companions to rise, and again they went out upon their journey. When the Wicked Witch looked out again and saw all her crows lying in a heap, she got into a terrible rage and blew 3 times upon her silver whistle. Forthwith there was a great buzzing in the air, and a swarm of black bees came flying toward her.
"Go to the strangers and sting them to death,"
commanded the witch, and the bees turned and flew rapidly until they came to where Dorothy and her friends were walking. But the woodman had seen them coming, and the Scarecrow decided what to do. "Take out my straw and scatter it over the little girl and the dog and the lion, and the bees cannot sting them," he said to the woodman. And this the woodman did, and as Dorothy lay close beside the lion and held Toto in her arms, the straw covered them entirely. The bees came and found no one but the woodman to sting, so they flew at him and broke off all their stings against the tin without hurting the woodman at all. And as bees cannot live when their stings are broken, that was the end of the black bees, and they lay scattered thick about the woodman like little heaps of fine coal. Then Dorothy and the lion got up, and the girl helped the Tin Woodman put the straw back into the Scarecrow again until he was as good as ever. So they started upon their journey once more. The Wicked Witch was so angry when she saw her black bees in little heaps like fine coal, she stamped her foot and tore her hair and gnashed her teeth. Then she called a dozen of her slaves, who were the Winkies, and gave them sharp spears, telling them to
"Go to the strangers and destroy them."
The Winkies were not a brave people, but they had to do as they were told. So they marched away until they came near to Dorothy. Then the lion gave a great roar and sprang toward them, and the poor Winkies were so frightened that they ran back as fast as they could. When they returned to the castle, the Wicked Witch beat them well with a strap and sent them back to their work, after which she sat down to think what she should do next. She couldn't understand how all her plans to destroy these strangers had failed, but she was a powerful witch as well as a wicked one, and she soon made up her mind how to act. There was in her cupboard a golden cap with a circle of diamonds and rubies running round it. This golden cap had a charm. Whoever owned it could call 3 times upon the winged monkeys, who would obey any order they were given. But no person could command these strange creatures more than 3 times. Twice had the Wicked Witch already used the charm of the cap. Once when she made the Winkies her slaves, and set herself to rule over their country, The winged monkeys had helped her do this. The second time was when she had fought against the great Oz himself and driven him out of the land of the West. The winged monkeys had also helped her in doing this. Only once more could she use this golden cap, for which reason she did not like to do so until all of her other powers were exhausted, but now that her fierce wolves and her wild crows and her stinging bees were gone, and her slaves had been scared away by the cowardly lion, she saw there was only one way left to destroy Dorothy and her friends. So the wicked witch took the golden cap from her cupboard and placed it upon her head. Then she stood upon her left foot and said, slowly, "Hippy, hippy." Next she stood upon her right foot and said, "Hello, hello, hello." After this she stood upon both feet and cried in a loud voice, "Zizzy, zuzzy, zick." Now the charm began to work. The sky darkened, and there was a low rumbling sound as heard in the air. There was a rushing of many wings, a great clattering, and chattering and laughing, and the sun came out of the dark sky to show the wicked witch surrounded by a cloud of monkeys, each with a pair of immense and powerful wings on his shoulders. One, much bigger than the others, seemed to be their leader. He flew close to the witch and said, "You've called upon us?"
You've called upon us for the last and third time. What do you command?
Go to the strangers who are within my land, and destroy them all except the lion. Bring that beast to me. I have a mind to harness him like a horse and make him work.
Your command shall be obeyed.
And then, with a great deal of chattering and noise, the winged monkeys flew away to the place where Dorothy and her friends were walking. Some of the monkeys seized the Tin Woodman and carried him through the air until they were over a country thickly covered with sharp rocks. Here they dropped the poor woodman, who fell so great a distance to the rocks that he lay battered and dented so he could neither move nor groan. Others of the monkeys caught the scarecrow, and with their long fingers pulled all the straw out of his clothes and head. They made his hat and boots and clothes into a small bundle and threw it into the top branches of a tall tree. The remaining monkeys threw pieces of stout rope around the lion and wound many coils about his body and head and legs until he was unable to bite or scratch or struggle in any way. Then they lifted him up and flew away with him to the witch's castle, where he was placed in a small yard with a high iron fence around it, so that he could not escape. But Dorothy they did not harm at all. She stood with Toto in her arms, watching the sad fate of her comrades, and thinking it would soon be her turn. The leader of the winged monkeys flew up to her, his long, hairy arms stretched out and his ugly face grinning terribly, but he saw the mark of the good witch's kiss upon her forehead and stopped short, motioning to the others not to touch her.
We dare not harm this little girl, for she is protected by the power of good, and that is greater than the power of the evil. All we can do is to carry the castle of the wicked witch and leave her there.
So carefully and gently they lifted Dorothy in their arms and carried her swiftly through the air till they came to the castle, where they set her down upon the front doorstep. Then the leader said to the witch,
"We have obeyed you as far as we were able. The Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow are destroyed. The lion is tied up in your yard. The little girl we dare not harm, nor the dog she carries in her arms. Your power over our band is ended. You'll never see us again."
Then all the winged monkeys, with laughing and chattering and noise, flew into the air and were soon out of sight. The wicked witch was both surprised and worried when she saw the mark on Dorothy's forehead, for she knew well that neither the winged monkeys nor she herself dared hurt the girl in any way. She looked down at Dorothy's feet, and seeing the silver shoes, began to tremble with fear, for she knew what a powerful charm belonged to them. At first the witch was tempted to run away from Dorothy, but she happened to look into the child's eyes and see how simple the soul was behind them, and that the little girl did not know of the wonderful power the silver shoes gave her. So the wicked witch laughed to herself and thought,
"I will still make her my slave, for she does not know how to use her power."
Then she said to Dorothy, harshly and severely,
"Come with me and see that you mind everything I tell you, for if you do not, I will make an end of you as I did the Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow."
Dorothy followed her through many of the beautiful rooms in her castle till they came to the kitchen, where the witch bade her clean the pots and kettles and sweep the floor and keep the fire fed with wood. Dorothy went to work meekly, with her mind made up to work as hard as she could, for she was glad the wicked witch had decided not to kill her. With Dorothy hard at work, the witch thought she would go into the courtyard and harness the Cowardly Lion like a horse. It would amuse her, she was sure, to make him draw her chariot wherever she wished to go to drive. But as she opened the gate, the lion gave a loud roar and bounded at her so fiercely that the witch was afraid and ran out and shut the gate again.
"If I cannot harness you,"
said the witch to the lion, speaking through the bars of the gate,
"I can starve you. You shall have nothing to eat until you do as I wish."
So after that she took no food to the imprisoned lion, but every day she came to the gate at noon and asked,
"Are you ready to be harnessed like a horse?"
and the lion would answer,
No. If you come in this yard, I will bite you.
The reason the lion did not have to do as the witch wished was that every night, while the woman was asleep, Dorothy carried him food from the cupboard. After he'd eaten, he'd lie down on his bed of straw, and Dorothy would lie beside him and put her head on his soft, shaggy mane while they talked of their troubles and tried to plan some way to escape. But they could find no way out of the castle, for it was constantly guarded by the yellow Winkies, who were the slaves of the Wicked Witch, and too afraid of her to not do as she told them. The girl had to work hard during the day, and often the witch threatened to beat her with the same old umbrella she always carried in her hand. But in truth she did not dare to strike Dorothy because of the mark upon her forehead. The child didn't know this, and was full of fear for herself and for Toto. Once the witch struck Toto a blow with her umbrella, and the brave little dog flew at her and bit her leg in return. The witch did not bleed from where she was bitten, for she was so wicked that all the blood in her had dried up many years before. Dorothy's life became very sad as she grew to understand that it would be harder than ever to get back to Kansas and Auntie Em again. Sometimes she would cry bitterly for hours, with Toto sitting at her feet and looking into her face, whining dismally to show how sorry he was for his little mistress. Toto did not really care whether he was in Kansas or the land of Oz, so long as Dorothy was with him, but he knew that the little girl was unhappy, and so that made him unhappy too. Now the Wicked Witch had had a great longing to have for her own the silver shoes which the girl always wore. Her bees and her crows and her wolves were lying in heaps and drying up, and she'd used up all the power of the golden cap. But if she could only get hold of the silver shoes, they'd give her more power than all the other things she'd lost. She watched Dorothy carefully to see if she ever took off her shoes, thinking she might steal them, but the child was so proud of her pretty shoes she never took them off except at night and when she took a bath. The witch was too much afraid of the dark to dare go in Dorothy's room at night to take the shoes, and her dread of water was greater than her fear of the dark, so she never came near when Dorothy was bathing. Indeed, the old witch never touched water, nor let water touch her in any way. But the wicked creature was very cunning, and she finally thought of a trick that would give her what she wanted. She placed a bar of iron in the middle of the kitchen floor, and then by magic arts made the iron invisible to human eyes, so that when Dorothy walked across the floor, she stumbled over the bar, not being able to see it, and fell at full length. She was not much hurt, but in her fall one of the silver shoes came off, and before she could reach it, the witch had snatched it away and put it on her own skinny foot. The wicked woman was greatly pleased with the success of her trick, for as long as she had had one of the shoes she owned half the power of their charm, and Dorothy could not use it against her, even had she known how to do so. The little girl, seeing she had lost one of her pretty shoes, grew angry and said to the witch, "Give me back my shoe."
"I will not, for it's now my shoe and not yours."
"You're a wicked creature. You have no right to take my shoe from me."
"I shall keep it just the same, and someday I shall get the other one from you too."
This made Dorothy so very angry she picked up the bucket of water that stood near and dashed it over the witch, wetting her from head to foot. Instantly the wicked woman gave out a loud cry of fear, and then as Dorothy looked at her in wonder, the witch began to shrink and fall away.
"See what you've done! In a minute I shall melt away."
"I'm so very sorry indeed," said Dorothy, who was truly frightened to see the witch actually melting away like brown sugar before her very eyes.
"Didn't you know water would be the end of me?"
"Of course not. How should I know?"
"Well, in a few minutes I shall all be melted, and you'll have the castle to yourself. I've been wicked in my day, but I never thought a little girl like you would be able to melt me and end my wicked deeds. Look out, here I go! What a world! What a world!
With these words, the witch fell down in a brown, melted, shapeless mass and began to spread over the clean boards of the kitchen floor. Seeing that she really had melted away to nothing, Dorothy drew another bucket of water and threw it over the mess. She then swept it all out the door. After picking out the silver shoe, which was all that was left of the old woman, she cleaned and dried it with a cloth and put it on her foot again. Then, being at last free as she to do as she chose, she ran out to the courtyard to tell the lion that the Wicked Witch of the West had come to an end. They were no longer prisoners in a strange land. Chapter 13. The Rescue. The Cowardly Lion was much pleased to hear that the Wicked Witch had been melted by a bucket of water, and Dorothy at once unlocked the gate of his prison and set him free. They went in together to the castle, where Dorothy's first act was to call all the Winkies together and tell them they were no longer slaves. There was great rejoicing among the Yellow Winkies, for they had been made to work hard during many years for the Wicked Witch, who had always treated them with great cruelty. They kept this day as a holiday, and then and ever after spent the time in feasting and dancing.
If our friends the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman were only with us, I should be quite happy.
Don't you suppose we could rescue them?
We could try.
So they called the Yellow Winkies and asked them if they could help to rescue their friends, and the Winkies said that they'd be delighted to do all they could in their power for Dorothy, who would set them free from their bondage. And so she chose a number of the Winkies who looked like they knew the most, and they all started away. They traveled that day and part of the next, where they came to the rocky plain where the Tin Woodman lay, all battered and bent. His axe was near him, but the blade was rusted and the handle had broken off short. The Winkies lifted him tenderly in their arms and carried him back to the Yellow Castle again, Dorothy shedding a few tears by the sad plight of her old friend, and then the lion looking sober and worried. When they reached the castle, Dorothy said to the Winkies,
"Are any of your people tinsmiths?"
Oh, yes.
Very. Some of us are very good tinsmiths. Then bring them to me.
And when the tinsmiths came, bringing with them all their tools in baskets, she inquired,
"Can you straighten out those dents in the Tin Woodman, bend him back to shape again, and solder him together where he's broken?"
Sorry, give me a minute. I was trying to sit cross-legged in this chair, but I think my legs are just too long to actually pull it off. Which is a shame, because I would love to sit cross-legged right now. Yeah, nope. My legs are too long. Oh, it was worth a try. You will have to excuse me. I'm still fussing with this chair. Really nice chair, though. Much better than the last one I had. Anyway, the tinsmiths looked the woodman over carefully, and answered that they thought they could mend him so he'd be as good as ever. And so they set to work in one of the big yellow rooms of the castle, and worked for 3 days and 4 nights, hammering and twisting and bending and soldering and polishing and pounding at the legs and the body and the head of the Tin Woodman, until at last he was straightened out into his old form, and his joints worked as well as ever. To be sure, there were several patches on him, but the tinsmiths did a great job, and the woodman was not a vain man, so he didn't mind the patches at all. When at last he walked into Dorothy's room... No, do not pick at that, sir. Yeah, we just discussed this, and you didn't pay attention last time, did you? Librarius decided that he wants to sit on top of the chair. Hi, yes. What if you just sat on my lap instead? It would be much simpler for everyone involved, Oh, okay. You want to lay back there? You can lay back there. When at last he walked into Dorothy's room and thanked her for rescuing him. He was so pleased that he wept tears of joy, and Dorothy had to wipe every tear carefully from his face. No, Bud. Really? You guys couldn't give me just one night where you don't pick at the chair, huh? You have lost top of chair privileges because it is inspiring your brother to problems too. Anyway, he was so pleased. Dorothy had to wipe every tear carefully from his face with her apron so his joints would not be rusted. At the same time, her own tears fell thick and fast at the joy of meeting her old friend once again, and these tears did not need to be wiped away. As for the lion, he wiped his eyes so often with the tip of his tail that it became quite wet, and he was obliged to go out into the courtyard and hold it in the sun until it dried. Buddy, you know the rules about beans on the table. Oh, no, library. Did you even find a plastic bag? I don't know how he finds these things. I swear he manifests plastic bags and cable ties. Anyway. If only we had the Scarecrow with us again, said the Tin Woodman when Dorothy had finished telling him everything that had happened. I should be quite happy. We must try to find him. And so she called the Winkies to help her, and they walked all that day and part of the next until they came to the tall tree in the branches of which the winged monkeys had tossed the Scarecrow's clothes. It was a very tall tree, and the trunk was so smooth that no one could climb it, but the Woodman said at once, I'll chop it down, then we can get the Scarecrow's clothes. Now, while the tinsmiths had been at work mending the Woodman himself, another of the Winkies, who was a goldsmith, had made an axe handle of solid gold and fitted it onto the Woodsman's axe, instead of the old broken handle. Others polished the blade until all the rust was removed, and it glistened like burnished silver. As soon as he'd spoken, the Tin Woodman began to chop, and in a short time the tree fell over with a crash, whereupon the Scarecrow's clothes fell out of the branches and rolled off onto the ground. Dorothy picked them up and had the Winkies carry them back to the castle, where they were stuffed with nice clean straw, and behold, here was the Scarecrow as good as ever, thanking them over and over again for saving him. Now that they were reunited, Dorothy and her friends spent a few happy days at the Yellow Castle, where they found everything they needed to make them comfortable. But one day the girl thought of Aunt Em, and said, We must go back to Oz and claim his promise. Yes, at last I shall get my heart, and I shall get my brains.
But I shall get my courage.
And I shall get back to Kansas. Oh, let us start for the Emerald City tomorrow.
This they decided to do. The next day they called the Winkies together and bade them goodbye. The Winkies were sorry to have him go, and they had grown so fond of the Tin Woodman that they begged him to stay and rule over them in the Yellow Land of the West. Finding they were determined to go, the Winkies gave Toto and the lion each a golden collar, and to Dorothy they presented a beautiful bracelet studded with diamonds, and to the Scarecrow they gave a gold-headed walking stick to keep him from stumbling, and to the Tin Woodman they offered a silver oil can inlaid with gold and set with precious jewels. Every one of the travelers made the Winkies a pretty speech in return, and all shook hands with them until their arms ached. Dorothy went to the witch's cupboard to fill her basket with food for the journey, and there she saw the golden cap. She tried it on her own head and found that it fitted her exactly. She didn't know anything about the charm of the golden cap, but she saw that it was pretty, so she made up her mind to wear it and carry her sunbonnet in her basket. Then, being prepared for the journey, they all started for the Emerald City, and the Winkies gave them all 3 cheers and many good wishes to carry with them. Alright, folks, let's dive into the next chapter here in a moment. With chapter 14, The Winged Monkeys. You will remember that there was no road, not even a pathway, between the castle of the Wicked Witch and the Emerald City. When the 4 travelers went in search of the witch, she'd seen them coming, and so sent the winged monkeys to bring them to her. It was much harder to find their way back through the big fields of buttercups and yellow daisies than it was being carried. They knew, of course, that they must go straight east toward the rising sun, and they started off in the right way. But at noon, when the sun was over their heads, they did not know which way was east and which was west. That was the reason they were lost in the great fields. They kept on walking, however, and at night the moon came out and shone brightly. So they lay down among sweet-smelling yellow flowers and slept soundly until morning, all but the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman. Apologies, podcast audience library, frequent co-host, and causer of problems for the evening, decided to jump up on my leg and did not stick the landing, as he has not been of late. Buddy, if you want to be up here, you can be up here, but I need to finish reading. I know, I should be going to bed soon. Don't worry about it. Come on. You want to come up here? Come up here. Yeah, I'm talking to you, Toe Beans. Come on. You can do it. Come on up here. Yeah, you wanted to be up here. Come on. I mean it. Come on. I don't want to be reading when you jump up here. Come on. Come up here. Don't just look up at me. I'm telling you to come up here. Come here. Hi. Yeah, I'm talking to you. Come on. There we go. Now it's rolled over. You just had to think about it. Had to let the little DVD brain cell hit the corner, didn't you? Anyway, the next morning, the sun was behind a cloud, but they started on as if they were quite sure which way they were going. If we walk far enough, I'm sure we shall come sometime to some place. But day by day passed away, and still they saw nothing before them but the scarlet fields. The Scarecrow began to grumble a bit. We've surely lost our way, and unless we shall find it again in time to reach the Emerald City, I shall never get my brains. Nor am I heart. It seems to me I can scarcely wait till I get to Oz, and you must admit this is a very long journey.
You see, I haven't the courage to keep tramping forever without getting anywhere at all.
And this made Dorothy lose heart. She sat down on the grass and looked at her companions, and they sat down and looked at her as well. And Toto found that for the first time in his life he was too tired to chase a butterfly that flew past his head. So he put out his tongue and panted and looked at Dorothy as if to ask what they should do next. Suppose we call the field mice. They could probably tell us the way to the Emerald City. To be sure that they could. Why didn't we think of that before? Dorothy blew the little whistle that she had always carried about her neck since the Queen of Mice had given it to her. In a few minutes they heard the pattering of tiny feet, and many of the small gray mice came running up to her. Among them was the Queen herself, who asked in her squeaky little voice, What can I do for my friends? We lost our way. Can you tell us where the Emerald City is? Certainly. It's a great way off, for you've had it at your back all this time. Then she noticed Dorothy's golden cap and said, Why don't you use the charm of the cap and call the wicked monkeys to you? They'll carry you to the city of Oz in less than an hour. I didn't know there was a charm. What is it? It's written inside the golden cap. But if you were to call the wicked monkeys, we must run away. They're full of mischief. They think it's great fun to plague us. Won't they hurt me? Oh, no. They must obey the wearer of the cap. Goodbye. And she scampered out of sight with all the mice hurrying after her. Dorothy looked inside the golden cap and saw some words written upon the lining. These, she thought, must be the charm, and so she read the directions carefully and put the cap upon her head. Pepe, Pepe, Caque, she said, standing on her left foot. What did you say? Asked the Scarecrow, who did not know what she was doing. Hello, hello, hello. Dorothy went on, standing this time on her right foot. Well, hello, replied the Tin Woodman calmly. Zik, said Dorothy, who was now standing on both feet. This ended the saying of the charm, and they heard a great chattering and flapping of wings as the band of winged monkeys flew up to them. The king bowed low before Dorothy and asked, What is your command? We have to go to the Emerald City, and we've lost our way. Who will carry you? Replied the king, and no sooner had he spoken than two of the monkeys caught Dorothy in their arms and flew away with her. Others took the Scarecrow and the Woodman and the Lion, and one little monkey seized Toto and flew after them, although the dog tried hard to bite him. The Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman were rather frightened at first, for they remembered how badly the winged monkeys had treated them before, but they saw that no harm was intended, and so they rode through the air quite cheerfully and had a fine time of looking at the pretty gardens and woods far below them. Dorothy found herself riding easily between two of the biggest monkeys, one of them the king himself. They had made a chair of their hands and were careful not to hurt her. Why do you have to obey the charm of the golden cap? That's a long story, but as we have a long journey before us, I will pass the time by telling you about it if you wish. I shall be glad to hear it.
Once we were a free people living happily in the great forest, flying from tree to tree, eating nuts and fruit, and doing just as we pleased without killing anybody, master. Some of us were rather too full of mischief at times, flying down to pull the tails of the animals that had no wings, chasing birds, and throwing nuts at people who walked in the forest. But we were careless and happy and full of fun, and enjoyed every minute of the day. This was many years ago, long before Oz came out of the clouds to rule over the land. There lived there then, away at the north, a beautiful princess who was also a powerful sorceress, you see. All her magic was used to help the people, and she was never known to hurt anyone who was good. Her name was Galette, and she lived in a handsome palace built from great blocks of ruby. Everyone loved her, but the greatest sorrow was she could find no one to love in return, since all the men were much too stupid and ugly to mate with someone who was beautiful and wise. At last, she found a boy who was handsome and manly and wise behind his ears. Galette made up her mind that when he grew to be a man, she would make him her husband. She took him to her ruby palace and used all her magic powers to make him as strong and good and lovely as any woman would wish. When he grew to manhood, Kulala, as he was called, was said to be the best and wisest man in all the land. While his manly beauty was so great that Galette loved him dearly and hastened to make everything ready for the wedding. My grandfather at the time was the king of the wicked monkeys. We lived in the forest near Galette's palace. The old fellow loved a joke better than a good dinner. Where was I? One day, just before the wedding, my grandfather was flying out with his band when he saw Kalala walking behind the river. He was dressed in a rich costume of pink silk and purple velvet. My grandfather thought he would see what he could do. So at his word, the band flew down and seized Kalala, carried him in their arms till they were over the middle of the river, and dropped him into the river, you see. Swim out, my fine fellow, cried my grandfather, and see if the water spotted your clothes. Gallagher was much too wise not to swim, and he was not in the least spoiled by the good fortune, and so he laughed when he came to the top of the water and swam to shore. But when Galette came running out to him, she found his silks and velvets all ruined by the river. The princess, you see, she was angry, and she knew, of course, who did it. She had all the winged monkeys brought before her, and said at first their wings should be tied. They should be treated as they treated Kalala and dropped in the river, but my grandfather pleaded hard, for he knew the monkeys would drown in the river with their wings tied, and Kalala said a kind word for them also. So Galette finally spared them on the condition the winged monkeys should ever after do the 3 times the bidding of the owner of the golden cap. This cap has been made for a wedding present for Kalala, and it's been said to have cost the princess half her kingdom, of course. So my grandfather and all the other monkeys agreed to the condition, and that's how it happens. We have 3 times the slaves to the owner of the golden cap, whoever may it be. And what became of them? Oh, Kalala became the first order of the golden cap, for he was first to lay his wishes upon us, as his bride couldn't bear the sight of us. He called us all to him in the forest after he'd married her in order to keep, where she would never again set eyes on a winged monkey, which we were glad to do. We were all afraid of her anyway. This was all we ever had to do until the golden cap fell into the hands of the wicked witch of the west, who made us enslave the Winkies and drive Oz himself out of the land of the west. Now the golden cap is yours, and 3 times you have the right to lay your wishes upon us.
As the Monkey King finished his story, Dorothy looked down and saw the green, shining walls of the Emerald City before them. She wondered at the rapid flight of the monkeys, but was glad the journey was over. The strange creatures set the travelers down carefully before the gate of the city. The king bowed low to Dorothy, and then flew swiftly away, followed by all his band.
That was a good ride.
Yes, and a quick way out of our troubles. How lucky was you that brought away that wonderful cap?
Okay, let me check how much book we have left. Oh, we've got plenty of book for next time. So we will dive into Chapter 15, The Discovery of Oz the Terrible, next week, here on Paper Cuts. Once again, I must insist that you are aware that the podcast exists, and doubly so, I must insist that you are aware that there are new episodes today. 2 of them even, where the podcast feed is diving into First Men in the Moon. So if you were more in the mood for H.G. Wells than L. Frank Baum, now is the perfect time to drop by over there. Plus, there's a few other H.G. Wells tales in the pile. I should note that Paper Cuts, the podcast, does not have to be listened to in order. Every time there is a new book, especially in Season 2, I'm a little less good about it in Season 1 of the podcast, but every time in Season 2 when there's a new book, I title the episode the title of the book. So just scroll through the episode, see if you find a title that catches your eye. Ooh, lastly but not leastly, I almost forgot to mention the Codex. They are a group of fellow reading streamers like myself. If you like what I do here, you will love the rest of the Codex. We didn't see anybody from the Codex tonight, but I think I think they're worth checking out. We're doing a Jane Austen novel for book club this month. At the end of February, we'll be doing a book club, and like I said, I think someone picked a Jane Austen novel to kind of go with the romance novel theme. Not a bad pick, honestly. We once a month pick a book for book club, and I'm hoping that on major holidays we can get into the habit of perhaps having raid trains, because I think that's divine, and I really enjoyed it when we did it for Christmas. So I think we should keep an eye on the calendar and maybe try and find a book for World Read Aloud Day or World Library Day or something like that, something appropriate. But I digress. If you liked Codex, if you liked me, you'll like Codex, and vice versa, I should say. And Codex has a Discord to drop into, just like I do, where we talk about the books we're reading for paper cuts and what bread I'm making this week and anything and everything, really. But I digress. Oh no. Oh, I have hiccups. I need to end the podcast right now. This has been Paper Cuts.